You know, there's nothing wrong with a healthy fantasy life, as long as you don't let it take over.
You call this healthy?
You're taking it so seriously. It's not without its element of humor. I am the goddess of empathy. Cast off your inhibitions and embrace love, truth, joy.
Oh my God.
Discard your facades and reveal your true being to me. Computer, discontinue.
Computer, belay that order.
Hi, and welcome to The Seeker
and The Skeptic.
I'm Kat, and I'm the flaky, unpredictable, maybe a bit irrational Seeker.
And I'm Rebecca. I'll be your sarcastic, grumpy, close-minded, skeptical host. Or maybe we should just be ourselves.
Sounds good to me. This podcast is going to dive deep into the controversial topics that some may call new age, or woo-woo, or just plain foolish.
And hopefully look at them with a skeptical but open-minded approach that will encourage understanding and acceptance from both the skeptics
and the seekers.
Hello, listeners. This episode, I sense we're going to talk about how we became empaths.
Why are you talking like that?
That's my Deanna Troi impression, the galaxy's most famous empath.
Is that another Star Trek reference?
Of course it is. Not all empaths are half betazoid.
But in the real world, empaths are people who believe that they can feel each other's emotions. Dogs' emotions, cats' emotions. And there seems to be a kind of spectrum between there being people who just report to be highly sensitive to people's emotions, to people who are, claiming almost to be psychic, or at least they're acting like it.
Which sounds like a superpower worth having. So we decided to find an online course that could teach us how to be empaths.
And quite honestly, I was a little bit skeptical about this, which is actually quite surprising because, empathy must be real, right? We did, before taking the course, we did take some tests. So these were a test to see how empathic we were. And this was from Judith Orloff, if I'm right. And I've actually read one of her books before, so I was quite excited about that. And another one to test our emotional quota, or EQ. And that was from Ali G. No, it was from Simon Baron Cohen.
Ali G's cousin.
So I scored a 51 on the EQ test and 17 on being an empath. And as far as I know, 51 puts me definitely in the average, normal category of being a emotionally intelligent person, I guess.
A normal, healthy human being.
Right. And the 17 on the empath score, which made me, I guess, empathic, according to this.
I think it says strong empathic tendencies.
Strong, hell yes.
So I did those tests as well. We thought it was a good idea to get a starting reading before we did the course to see if we could boost our empathy. The empath test, I was very skeptical of. It had questions like, have you been labelled as overly sensitive, shy, or introverted? And other questions like, do you frequently get overwhelmed or anxious? Do you startle easily? Do you need a long time to recuperate after being with difficult people or energy vampires?
Yeah, I mean, I love all this stuff because personality type tests are totally my jam. But yeah, I felt like I could agree with most statements. So what were your test results?
So I got 15, which is also strong empathic tendencies. But I felt like it wasn't really testing my empathic tendencies. I felt like it was testing maybe social awkwardness or introversion. It didn't really feel, and I got a couple of friends to do it as well. My friend Jen got 13, also strong empathic tendencies. My friend Tom, who's, forgive me, but one of the least empathetic people I know, got 15, also strong empathetic tendencies. And I sent it to my friend John, who replied, "This feels like a trap." And then eventually told me he also got 15. So it just seems like human beings all test around the same.
Right.
At least in my range. Did you get anyone else to do it?
I did, and they got, I believe it was 14. So yeah.
It would be interesting to find anyone who got anything outside that range, really. On the EQ test, I got really low. I only got 11 out of 60. The test is developed by Simon Baron-Cohen, as Kat said, who is an autism researcher. And he says that scores of 30 or less indicate a lack of empathy common in people with autism or Asperger's. So I know I have sort of autistic traits. I've never been diagnosed, but that didn't really surprise me that much that I only got 11. But it is quite shockingly low.
It kind of surprised me because it wasn't the cutoff point 30.
Yeah, so 11 is very low.
Like, I kind of think that you must have, I don't know, been primed to think that you were autistic.
Yeah, it's quite possible.
I find it really hard to believe.
I tried to answer as honestly as I could. I have done tests like this before, which have suggested to me that I fall in sort of normal for an autistic woman sort of ranges on these things. So it didn't surprise me that much. But yeah, 11 is really quite low. But the questions for this test were much better. So the questions were things that it was harder to game, I think. I've got some examples here. One was, I dream most nights, and you had to answer from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So there's like 4 boxes you could check.
Did you say you disagree?
I don't think I dream most nights, or I don't remember my dreams. I know I dream every night because we did our episode on lucid dreaming, but I don't remember. I assume it's asking me if I remember my dreams, which I don't. Had questions like, I prefer practical jokes to verbal humor. I can't always see.
No one prefers practical jokes. Do you?
No.
So, but this is why the test was good, because I didn't know what they were getting at with a lot of the questions.
Maybe
I didn't know how to answer incorrectly.
People
or
with
I didn't
communication
know how to game it, like
difficulties. Yeah, maybe people with communication difficulties would find it harder to understand verbal humor. I don't know.
But do you prefer practical jokes?
No, definitely not.
Okay, so again, I'm just wondering where it got you.
I think it's stuff like I can't always see why someone should have felt offended by a remark. I find that difficult. I'm not very good at like anticipating what other people are thinking or feeling. Or there was one which said, I can't relax until I've done everything I had planned to do that day, which is completely me. I don't know if that's an autistic thing or just a
that's
weird
like
person thing.
An anxiety thing.
Yeah,
that's like an anxiety thing. And so is that thing about not thinking that you judged like somebody else's emotion or not. It's not like that you got it wrong. It's more that you're scared that you got it wrong, right? Which, again, that's more like about anxiety. So that's really interesting that I don't think that necessarily reflects your emotional abilities, because if you didn't have that, you wouldn't care, right?
That's true,
You would like probably assume that you got it right.
Yeah, but I think autistic people are quite anxious about how well they communicate with people as well. I don't think they don't care. Anyway, I don't know. That's something we can leave up in the air, whether I'm autistic or not. I don't like the idea of self-diagnosing on anything, but it's just an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing that I happen to be very low empathy, according to the Simon Baron-Cohen test, who's a proper scientist, but I have strong empathic tendencies, according to Dr. Julia Orloff, the empath lady.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're going into this not really knowing what to expect.
And did you ask other people? Sorry, I just wanted to get like ideas about other people on the Simon Baron-Cohen EQ test. Did you get a range of scores there?
No, I didn't. It's a bit of a trickier test. It's got like 60 questions. I can't just throw that to my friends.
You couldn't convince anyone. I totally did. And my friend got 48. So you're definitely...
Thanks.
This is interesting. Okay.
So the course that we did is by a lady called Amanda Flaker. It's called Empowering Empathic Abilities. Part of the reason why I chose this course, I must admit, is because the website is so dated, and I thought this is going to have some gems. It's going to have some funny stuff. Also, I chose it because of the price. There were some much more expensive courses for empaths available on the internet, but this one was very reasonably priced. So,
yeah, and I guess my expectations with that was. I've taken other online courses before, so I don't know about you, but I was expecting some like pretty high quality videos, even though it was $20, like £20. There weren't very many high quality videos. Basically, I think the first one was filmed on a phone, clearly,
and a lot of them she chose
style.
To do in beautiful locations. Like she chose to film one video by a temple and one in a garden and one by a waterfall, but all of these locations do not have the best sound quality. So
right. And then if you didn't get neither good sound quality and sometimes no video at all, so you'd just be looking at a black screen, which does not, in my books, qualify as a video course. But
in her defense, I think these are quite old. I can't remember exactly what the date on them was, but she did, when I bought the course, she emailed me and said, this is like the last month that I'm selling these courses, and then I'm going to move on to something else. So maybe this was her first attempt. She might well have improved her video skills later. But who is this woman? Who is Amanda Flaker? What sort of impression did you get of her?
I mean, the words that I wrote down were not kind, and I refuse to repeat them. Basically, I mean, because I'm such an empath, I could obviously pick up on some vibes. I was not, I didn't warm to her straight away. It was not, I guess what I was kind of expecting was somebody who seemed sensitive, and maybe there was a level of humility that I like, which I kind of didn't get from her. Humility, is that the right word? Something like that.
Yeah, she sort of assumes you know who she is, which is fair, because if you're buying her course, I mean, most people don't just type empath developing powers course into Google and see what comes up. Most people buying her course probably have been following her for a while and like in her Facebook group and stuff. So she has that sense of like, you know who I am, you know I'm great, you know I know what I'm talking about, here we go. That's how she approaches it.
Yeah, and I guess making a lot of assumptions, which, I mean, I'm used to this kind of world where I'm not talking to empaths, but I'm talking to introverts, right? And I guess there are some things that we might assume, but I try to, say, well, maybe it's this, or like maybe you could try this, and I'm not going to promise that everything's going to work for everyone. But there was a level of confidence which kind of unsettled me.
There was a note right at the beginning in the written part of the course. It really was a little bit all over the place in the way it was organized, so maybe you didn't see it, but she did write, like, as a disclaimer, if any of the exercises, thoughts, suggestions, or beliefs I present here don't resonate with you, don't take them on. Those words are in capital letters. Take only what's helpful, leave the rest. I believe the things are individual and subjective, and I have no interest in being right, in inverted commas, only useful. If at any point this information ceases to be useful, find something that is.
Oh, wow. I should have just stopped there.
So I had to do a bit of digging just to find out more about her so that we could tell you about her. I found an interview with her somewhere online on another podcast. And I got the story, which she does hint at during the course, but she didn't sort of introduce herself in the first video, as you might expect. So she comes from just this horribly abusive household. Her mum died at a young age. And in her early 20s, she found that she couldn't really function in what she refers to as normal society, or the matrix. So I guess that just means like having an office job and doing normal, boring life stuff. So she started developing her spiritual life, I guess. And she really didn't like the type of Christianity she was brought up in, and that was a big part of it, rejecting that. I think her mum was Christian. Oh no, her mum was Mormon and her dad was Catholic, and there was always like tension between that whole situation. So she got to this point where she just didn't know
mix.
Exactly. She just didn't know who she was, and she felt like she'd internalized other people's ideas about who and how she should be, and she just didn't want to be in the matrix anymore. And that's when she awakened to her gifts and started developing herself as an empath and started being what she is online, which I guess is an expert in empath stuff and maybe a teacher. I guess that's her career.
Sure. I mean, I can relate to having such a random like profession, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
But I mean, so that's the thing. I'm not like averse to people having an experience with the world, learning from it, and then trying to show others the way, or at least, feeling like you have to not evangelize, but like, share that with other people. I can relate to that.
And that sort of journey of like getting to your mid-20s and feeling like you're not sure who you are, and then finding out something new about yourself. I mean, that's a story that lots of people have, isn't it? So
yes, very common experience.
I was convinced you were going to say Saturn Return.
It was on the tip of my tongue.
She's being so good. She's being so good lately. She knows I'm getting riled up with the astrology stuff.
That's because, your Mars is, So what is an empath, according to Amanda?
Okay. Again, not very well defined, but someone who feels emotions via energy, not just the emotions of people, animals, like you said, nature, rocks. Apparently, rocks have consciousness, so you can get into them. You can basically, you can connect with anything through energy. I'll talk a bit about energy in a minute, but she lists types of empaths. She says you can be an emotional empath, which is the one you're thinking of when you think of Deanna Troi, as I know you do often. Feeling other people's feelings as if they're yours, or as if they're yours. Or you can be a clairvoyant empath, which is
this
visions.
Is what I meant by the psychic part.
Yeah. Clairsentient empath, which is sensing stuff, just knowing stuff. I think is that what Jackie was? Do you remember Jackie?
Yes. I do. Oh, how could I forget Jackie, our medium? And if anyone wants to check out our experience with mediumship, we do have an episode about that.
Yeah, just scroll down, look for mediumship. It's somewhere in there. And then the other one she mentions are intellectual empaths, which sounds a bit like the clairsentient because it's just knowing other people's feelings. But basically she's saying there's lots of different ways to be an empath, but the classic way is you feel other people's feelings in the same way you feel your own. And how you do that is through energy. So she just throws this word around all the time. And I'm sure you...
as we all do.
Well, do we? It's sort of become a catch-all term, hasn't it?
It has. And I'm finding personal issue with it, and I do need to straighten it out in my own head. And I think we've spoken about it before, like in real life conversations. And I think the way I sort of see it is, well, there's something kind of animating us, right? And I'm kind of just calling that energy. And I think we can all understand what it feels like to have low energy and high energy. I think, that's like a commonly used phrase. But actually defining what energy is, I haven't gotten to that point.
Well, it's like, that's the problem with it, because it is so vague and it's just used. Like, I know when I'm feeling enthusiastic and when I'm feeling not enthusiastic. I guess you could call that low energy and high energy. I know when I'm feeling tired and when I'm feeling awake, which is, it's kind of like, it's a word that encompasses all of that, but then also suggests something more, something's kind of metaphysical.
Yes.
And what really frustrates me about the use of the word is I don't mind it being used as a metaphor. If you want to use it as a metaphor, instead of saying I feel enthusiastic or I feel, wide awake or whatever, fine, use it that way. But then the way it switches and it starts being used in a sciencey way. So she says things like, we're all one. We know this through quantum physics. What looks like negative space between us is actually full of energy lines that connect.
Okay, so if we did have a drinking game, we would have to be like, when does an expert mention quantum physics?
Yeah, exactly.
Not an expert, but you know what I mean? Like that does get used up a lot. And you are teaching me to be a bit more skeptical about that particular key phrase. Even though I think there might be something to it. But that other thing about so energy not just being something that ends with our bodies, but can kind of cross bodies, right? So I can pick up your energy. And I will find myself doing that quite regularly. Somebody the other day, I was like, I just, didn't get good energy, like vibes, I guess, from them. And even though it feels true for me, I don't know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
I couldn't scientifically explain it.
It's really difficult because it's a complex thing that's going on. I think when we're in the presence of others, there's all sorts of stuff. We're remembering our history with that person. We're reading their facial expressions and their body language. We're thinking about our own experience up to that point into that day. Maybe you just walked into the room and you're already a bit anxious and then it smells bad in there and then you see the person and they've got like a worried frown and you say, oh, the energy is rubbish here, or whatever you say. Yeah. But what you're trying to capture is something that's very it's got lots of variables all pushed in, and your energy is a convenient word for it. But
convenient.
Yeah, it's annoying when it slips over into being used because, of course, as we all know, energy is a quantity, like mass or weight. It's measured in joules. So, for example, the energy required to lift a medium-sized tomato up to 1 meter, according to Wikipedia, assuming the tomato has a mass of approximately 100 grams, as you would, is 1 joule. That's how much energy it is. And if you drop that tomato and it falls down 1 meter, that would also be a joule. That is energy. That's what energy is. So when someone's using it in another context, they're using it metaphorically, which, as I said, cool, useful. But then you can't like switch back to give yourself science credibility by sort of just using the language.
Yes.
It's a really dodgy little thing. I don't think people are doing it on purpose at all, but it is a bit dodgy.
Yeah, and maybe we go back to saying, like, you know, like in the hippie days, people would talk about vibes, I think, more. I think language is becoming problematic when we try to kind of squeeze these concepts, like we talked about, including astrology, into that realm of science.
Yeah, I quite like vibes, although I'm sure there'd be some scientists who'd be like, well, it's not really vibrations, so you can't win with us skeptics. We're always going to find something to complain about.
We just need some new words.
Yeah.
All right, new project for listeners. Send in new words for energy that we can like put in place of it.
That would be so useful. Yeah, please tweet us. So I guess the first question that I had when I got into this, in researching and doing this course, is where do empaths come from? And she talked about that a bit in the course. Did you get an impression of where she thinks they come from?
I did not, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, no, that's understandable because she was pretty vague. Sometimes she sort of gives the impression that they're born, and sometimes she gives the impression that they're made. The born version is she mentions that Jesus was the first empath that we know of, and after he died, many more have been born, and it's like an evolution of humanity. So they're kind of like the Homo superior. They're coming to replace us, or I guess we are empaths according to the test. So we're coming to replace you, listeners, with our empathic skills. So that's one sort of perspective, which she sometimes references. But I think she's more on the side of that empaths are made by early childhood experience. She says 95% of empaths that she's had contact with come from extremely abusive backgrounds, which I think is really interesting. Basically, there's this theory, and she doesn't cite this, but I just happen to know this because when I first heard it, I was completely taken by it. This was many years ago. There's a psychologist called Alice Miller. She wrote a book called The Drama of Being a Child. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
It was really popular, but it is from 1979, so there's no reason you should have come across it. In America, it's called Drama of the Gifted Child, but we British people don't like to think of ourselves as gifted, so they had to sell it under a different name here. Basically, the theory is something like kids who are really attuned to their parents' expectations, that they're desperate to do whatever they can to fulfill them, and then they end up ignoring their own needs. So classic example would be parents who are violent and the kid has to watch very carefully, trying not to provoke them. Or if parents were neglectful, then the kid would be trying to do whatever they can to get scraps of attention, just paying really close attention to the parents. Or if they were like erratic, like they didn't know what they were going to do next, the kid would be watching very carefully to try and predict what's going to happen to stay safe. And Alice Miller's idea was that early training and getting very good at guessing what your parents are thinking all the time basically makes you're like that in adult life with everyone in your life. And it's very hard to figure out who you are because you're constantly paying attention to other people. And it feels a bit like that's what Amanda's talking about when she says that empaths come from extremely abusive backgrounds. We have this like experience that makes us attuned to something that other people aren't attuned to. I don't know whether she's read that book or is citing it directly, but I just thought that was a really interesting overlap. But that said, I'm much more skeptical about that whole Alice Miller theory now. I mean, it's nice to have like a story to explain the way you are, because obviously the reason I liked it was because I thought, well, that explains why I'm so, I'm so concentrating on other people's needs and not very aware of my own. But I don't know now.
And it's almost like having a booby prize. It's like saying, yeah, you've been through this shit, but this is your bonus is you get these superpowers.
Yes. Yeah.
It's quite a comforting idea, for sure.
It is.
And I'm all about comforting ideas.
There's been loads of articles and stuff written lately in the last year or so about how personality is much more heritable than we thought, and unless you're like extremely horribly abused, you're pretty much stuck with whatever genetically you're told, you're given. So all the parenting theories are becoming a lot more in question because actually parenting maybe doesn't have as much effect as we once thought. So I don't know whether the whole Alice Miller theory gets thrown out the window because of that. I mean, I'm talking about this in sort of the sense that we were learning about in the course. Obviously, we'll talk about later. I'm not sure I really believe in empaths, but the theory of being born an empath actually makes more sense because there are certain personality traits that you are born with, which could lead you to believe you're an empath. And there is research suggesting, there's this guy called Harvey Irwin. He wrote a great book called The Psychology of Paranormal Belief, that belief in the paranormal itself could well be something that is partly genetic, because when they do surveys, personality surveys of people believe in the paranormal, you find certain common traits like fantasy proneness, disassociation. I think we've talked before about schizotypal personalities. So it could well be that you are born an empath because you're born with certain personality structure that makes you more inclined to focus on other people's feelings. And then on top of that, all the other traits that go along with, you know, that might lead you to believe in the paranormal or in the supernatural.
That's so interesting. It was actually something that I've been thinking about more, you know, with our ayahuasca experience, whether or not people are just more prone to having more like rich, like let's say visual experiences or more intense experiences just genetically. Like that's the way their mind is like structured, right?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense that some people would be more inclined to have these feelings and therefore they'd be more inclined to adopt a paranormal sort of worldview.
Yes.
In fact, there's this guy, Ryan Cropper, who's an empath, who I was looking at online. He reckons that psychedelics like ayahuasca can trigger becoming an empath.
Wow. Okay, more ayahuasca, please.
So we should have taken the empath test before we did ayahuasca as well, to really figure out that happened.
Yeah.
But I've definitely noticed that my emotions are intensified well, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard.
You're like biting your skeptical tongue.
Yeah. I've had a couple of intense emotional experiences since we did ayahuasca, but who knows what that's related to. Could be related to nothing.
I'm sure like there's, you know, our shaman there, it was celebrating for you. Like, that's good.
Yes.
That's so good that you had. Anyway.
So she had a couple of... So basically every video on this course was just her chatting. So she chatted a bit about everything we've talked about so far. And then she also gave us some exercises. She didn't really lead us through them. She just gave them to us and said, go do these exercises on your own time. So what did you do? You did a bit of the journaling, right?
Right. I mean, journaling is something that I do anyway. So I really like this recommendation, and it's something that I kind of consistently talk about to people in terms of like basically having these check-ins. And something else I say, and I'll talk a little bit about introversion in a bit, but this idea that when we process our thoughts on paper, we can kind of digest them better, or like, yeah. So I find that very, very helpful. And I think if I am going through something and my emotions are heightened, or I'm, you know, something that is related to emotion comes up, journaling is like my go-to resource for that.
And she suggested doing a check-in in the morning and the evening, just like writing down what your emotions were.
Yes. And this is something that I have done like a lot. I mean, maybe it's not as like simple as that, but it definitely comes out in my journal. You know, my journal isn't just like I did this and I did that. It's like, how did I feel? And I talk a lot about, I mean, I know you're probably going to berate me for the energy thing, but the idea of checking in on your energy levels. And, you know, you were talking about tiredness, and the opposite of tiredness is feeling energetic, right?
Yeah.
And that's the word we use. So I really do believe in kind of keeping track of that and seeing what lifestyle factors are affecting that, which, you know, maybe that's not the hardest science, but it certainly has been helpful for me.
No, I think that's really useful, because we're both those sort of people who have a tendency to just push ourselves too hard. And sometimes it's easy to forget to, I don't know, like eat or sleep or do all those things that our human bodies need.
Basic needs.
Go to the toilet, things like that, you know.
Yeah.
I find it really hard writing down my emotions. I tried to write down every morning and every evening my emotions, and I found, which might not surprise you from my EQ score, I have a very limited palette of emotions. I basically have neutral, cheerful, or, and this is rare nowadays, anxious. Those are my 3 emotions. I don't know how else. I was really pushing myself to try and write, because she says you should think about what you need, like interrogate them and see where, like, if you can think about in your childhood what these things felt like and stuff, and like when you first felt that feeling, and just like really work it through and think about it deeply. And I was like, I just feel like most mornings I wake up neutral. That's what I wrote down in my morning journal every morning, more or less. Neutral, calm, chill. And then by the evening, I've gone through emotions during the day, I guess. I wasn't paying attention. And then in the evening, I'm cheerful because it's evening and it's like, oh, the end of the day, good times. And those are all I have written in my little book.
I feel like if I checked in with myself even more so, I would probably know 24 different emotions before noon.
Wow.
Like, really? Yeah, I mean, and I think it's really not so much that I'm feeling anything more. I feel like it's just a vocabulary thing.
It could well be, yeah. I did try that asking what I need thing, but that, again, I found that really difficult because, one morning I woke up and I was feeling neutral, and I asked myself what I needed, and I was just scrabbling around. I was like, well, I need breakfast. Yeah, but I need breakfast every morning. All the things and then I was like, you know what I really fancy? Going to have a look at the sea, because I live about 20 minutes drive from the sea. And I thought, yeah, I'll go to the sea. So I just hopped in the car and drove to the sea and walked along by the sea. And I thought, oh, this is nice. And I thought, wait a minute, if every morning I asked myself what I fancied doing and then did it, I'd never get any work done.
Yeah, this is a big thing. I mean, maybe we'll do a law of attraction kind of thing another day, but that's like a big idea in that world. It's like this idea that you are constantly doing whatever feels good in the moment. And that could be a pretty damaging way to live long term, or if you were only doing that. And I think there is, if you were to take it to the extreme, that's kind of ridiculous. But I do like that idea of kind of checking in with yourself and being like, instead of, that could affect you. Let's say if you're reaching for the fridge and you think you need like the sugary brownie, but maybe you don't. If you actually asked yourself or took a step back and took a pause, you might be like, maybe that's not what I really need. Maybe I need to talk to a loved one. So I feel like there's definitely a lot of value in that. And most of the value comes from taking that pause.
I think this is one of the things that I might actually end up taking away from this course, regularly checking in with my emotions, seeing if there's anything going on, is quite good. And I think you're right. I think if I paid more attention and started thinking about it more often, maybe I would develop more vocabulary, and then maybe even more emotions.
It's funny. Yeah.
I did try a couple of the other exercises about chakras. She's very into chakras. In fact, her website is thechakracenter.com or something, I think. And we'll put a link in the show notes so you can do this course if you get there in time, because it might well be off the market by the time we put this podcast out. But you can find all of her stuff there. So she's very into the Sacral Chakra, which I wasn't familiar with.
Yeah.
I'm not really familiar with any of the chakras.
Well, this is one of my problems with the course, because I'm all for people talking about chakras, but it's the fact that she kind of didn't give any, like she just jumped into it, assuming we were all on that page. Whereas I felt like I needed a bit more of a, why are you bringing that in?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, me too.
Like, and defend your chakra usage.
I had to Wikipedia it to find out what chakras were. Apparently they're like energy centers, or I think chakra. Interestingly, once I went to a yoga class many years ago, and it was a different yoga teacher to my normal yoga teacher, and she was very into chakras, and she handed out a piece of paper with some information about chakras, which I was very taken with, because it was just like a picture of the human body, and then it had like diagram of like however many spots down the spine. And this is something I learned from Wikipedia. Apparently there's debate about how many chakras there are. Buddhists think 5, Hindus think 6 or 7. So anyway, this little piece of A4 paper with the printed human body, and then in capital letters, chakras do not spin. And I was like,
that was her.
I just thought it was interesting that she felt this was such an important message she had to get out there. She was handing a piece of paper to every single one of her yoga students about the chakras. But I think the word chakra means wheel or something, doesn't it? So I think most people think they do spin or turn or something.
Well, yeah, it's just a kind of like suggestion of movement. This idea that energy is starting kind of at the root or base chakra, and the idea is that you want to encourage it to rise up through the top of your head, I guess. And it's kind of energy is is like rotating in these different ways. There are a couple of different ways that it can rotate, but geez, I mean, it's a nice image.
Yeah.
And I would say that it's helpful, but again, maybe that's another show altogether. But either way, like you said, she was focusing on the
sacral chakra.
On the sacral.
Which
yes.
is 2 inches below your belly button, which I would generally call, well, never mind. But it's that area. She says she gets you to focus on that chakra because that one's the one that's all to do with emotions and creativity and empath related stuff. And the idea is to just focus on it and see what it has to tell you. Like if there are any messages coming up from down there up to the old brain. She says that one
old noggin.
Yeah, exactly. She said one client saw her chakra as a whole planet with Venusian priestesses on it. So I was quite excited about this. So I focused on my sacral chakra. I was having a bit of period pain at the time, which did not help. So it was like all I could think, because I was trying to think what it looks like, because she's trying to get you to visualize things, what it feels like, what it looks like, what it smells like, everything. And I was like, it's like a washing machine in there. It's just like that horrible sound of like a slightly broken washing machine. And then I sort of, it didn't really calm down because I was still in discomfort. So I was thinking about what it looked like, and I started imagining growing a tail like a monkey.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was thinking I could maybe interpret that as being about playfulness. Maybe my sacral chakra wants me to be more playful. But because I was sitting in lotus position, I was thinking, no, I probably look more like a lemur. You know those ring-tailed lemurs? And they sit... Google image it. Everyone at home. Google image it. Lemur, ring-tailed lemurs. Yeah, so, but that's cool because, you know, like the... I don't know exactly. I'm probably getting this wrong. But I think, like, before we were apes, we were more lemur-like. Like that's a progression, evolutionary progression, when you go through a sort of more lemur-like character before you get to apes, maybe. Anyway, it doesn't matter because it's all about me and my experience and my meditation. Very self-focused, this whole thing. So I was thinking, I could interpret this if I was going to go along with this, that maybe my sacral chakra is asking me to honor the more animalistic aspects of myself, be less intellectual.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like that.
I got so into the sacral chakra that I did the other exercise she suggested, the externalizing the chakra exercise. Do you remember that one?
No.
So this is, you're so enthusiastic about this call. It's really striking. No, it's okay. This is the one where you project your inner world, your sacral chakra, out into the world. Now, I think I remember this being called the pathetic fallacy. That sounds horrible, but I'm pretty sure that...
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I'm. You have to fact check me, but I think when I was studying literature, when this is done in literature, it's referred to as pathetic fallacy, where you like Jane Eyre is walking out across the fields and the sky gets all moody because it's like reflecting her inner world, and that's basically the idea of this. So you focus on your own chakra, whichever one you're working with. I was working with my sacral chakra still, and you focus on that, and then you sort of project out into the world, and then you look around in the world, and anything you see in the world you interpret as being all about you. So it came naturally to me, obviously. So I went down and sat by the river, and pretty much as soon as I started focusing on my chakra, the sun came out. So I was like, oh, well, that's encouraging.
Aww.
Maybe it's good to be doing this. Then I noticed a spider web, and I thought, oh, that's saying that my sacral chakra is all like dusty and unused, and you know, I need to work it out a bit more. And then I was thinking
I'd say that's like it sounds like a representation of creativity.
Oh, could
like
be.
The spider web is, yeah.
Yeah,
anyway,
building,
continue.
yeah. I was just thinking like in a haunted house. It's like, what's my sacral chakra like? Oh, it's all dusty. It's cobwebs everywhere.
Damn you, Stephen King. See, this is the problem.
And then I was thinking... I'm sitting next to the River Ouse, which is near where I live, and that's the river where Virginia Woolf killed herself. So that popped into my head as I was staring at the river, and I was like, oh, yes, depression. She suffered from horrible depression. That's why she killed herself. She felt on another bout of depression coming on and just didn't think she could get through, which is tragic. But maybe that's why I'm a bit hesitant to get into all this emotional stuff. Like, maybe it's understandable because, you know, I've experienced mental illness. That's the thing. Like, so maybe this is saying, hey, it's okay. Like, you know, it's okay to be a bit hesitant, and maybe it's sensible. And then I saw a kestrel, and I thought to myself, kestrels used to be called windfuckers, which is a brilliant, like, it's one word, windfucker. Fuck
amazing.
Back then meaning to beat or strike. That's where the word fuck originally came from.
I thought it meant fornication under consent of the king.
I think that's afterwards. At first it just means
Wow.
beat or strike, and then it turns into thrust, and then you can see where it gets to where we are now. But you know, like, I don't know if you do know. You know how a kestrel hovers when it sees prey?
Yes, sure.
It's one of the most remarkable birds of prey to do this because it's so small and it works so hard to stay up there, and it's just beating its wings as hard as it can, and it's staying almost completely stationary, and it's keeping its head still so it can look straight down. Amazing birds. But I'll save that for my bird podcast. I don't really have a bird podcast, but I should. Anyway, kestrels, amazing. And I was just thinking, like, the way you have to, like, hang in the air, and it's got all these forces acting on it, and it's got its gaze going straight down, looking at whatever prey it's seen. It's got the wind, it's got the, you know, it's using its wings there to stay and exert the pressure against the air, and it's just like, it's using so much effort to stay focused, to hold everything in balance, to sit there in the air almost completely still. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of like the situation I find myself in, trying to mediate between emotions and intellect and, you know, whatever, all these forces going on in my head, and I've just got to stay in one place. And it is like, I don't know, I'm really working hard at this, trying to interpret my experience as something to do with my sacral chakra. And I think if I sort of took that meditation, I would say something like, it's difficult, and acknowledging that it's difficult to deal with being a human being and human emotions and stuff is a sensible thing to do, and acknowledging that it takes effort to put everything together and to behave like just to get by, you know? I don't know. So generally I got this impression that I should be kinder to myself about the whole experience of emotions and not beat myself up just because I only scored an 11 on the EQ.
You're clearly really good at this. Like, I'm not even sure if I would have come up with all of that richness, you know, and like coming up with the washing machine and the tail and yeah, all of that. I feel like that seems to come particularly natural to you, like going back to that thing of maybe that's an inborn trait. So this is why I still struggle with that idea that, for example, on the EQ test, like how we categorize all of these different traits, and we're still struggling with that.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, what I'm doing is storytelling, right?
Well,
I'm just putting little bits of
it's
information
imagination.
together. Yeah, that's not empathy. That's something else. And I do think I do think I'm kind of good at that. But it helps that I was in like a natural setting, and I know facts about the natural world, so I can like draw those in. I wouldn't have had so much. She suggested doing it in an airport, and I was like, well, if I was in an airport, I'd have no idea what I was doing. So,
oh my god, that would be slightly depressing. But yes, I think what if a lot of these like professional empaths simply have a good imagination? Right. This is something that came up a lot for me when I was watching the course and like just contemplating the idea of this level of what we're calling empathy. When it kind of crosses into a sort of mystical realm, and we're talking about energy. Well, you know, how much does imagination come into play? Because I do think having a strong imagination is helpful for a load of these, I guess, practices.
Yeah, it is. It's. I always think this, like, that's what I kind of miss about not being involved in the spiritual stuff so much anymore. Is there's a lot of basically arts and crafts. Like you're making up stories, you're making a little pentagram out of old bits of stick and stuff, and that's all fun. Like, and I think maybe we don't do enough of that. I mean, I do, because it's kind of what I do for a living, but a lot of people don't do enough of that in just their day-to-day lives. And you have to kind of dress it up as something spiritual, or, you know, oh, this is self-improving.
Well, like goal-oriented.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can't just sit there and make a friendship bracelet, because you're a grown-up, and grown-ups don't make friendship bracelets, apparently.
Right.
A big focus of
We
this
clearly
course was on how to deal with all the myriad problems that happen to empaths. Did you notice that? It seemed like a lot of
Oh my God, so many problems for us poor empaths. And okay, to an extent, some of these I talk about myself. I do believe in. But I often say things like, you know, this is not reserved for empaths alone.
For introverts
like
alone,
boundaries. Well, often for me it's introverts, yeah, sure. But like it's the same goes for this or any other kind of label that you want to stick on somebody. It's, having that caveat is good. So the boundaries idea, this idea that if somebody is kind of encroaching on your boundaries, that's not good. And again, this is something that I've talked about, and I kind of wrestled with that word. What impression did you know, prior to this course, you've heard people talk about boundaries before or not?
Yeah. No, I'm kind of familiar with the concept. It's basically like it's being able to say no to things that you don't like, and being able to say, oh, I've had enough, and go home when you're at a party and you're not enjoying yourself. It's that kind of like self-knowledge and being assertive enough to get out of situations or say no thank you to things, which is something I really struggle with, because I do tend to be a bit of a people pleaser. So you might find that hard to believe. You, Kat, might find that hard to believe.
No, it's really interesting. We've had conversations before where I might come down on one side, and you seem to come down on the side more so of actually considering the other person's feelings more, which is, again, this is why the whole EQ thing just it's dumbfounded me, because the people pleasing and being very, not so much sensitive, but I guess considerate, right, of other people's feelings.
Oh,
and I think that's a good thing, right? And I think it is difficult, because where is that line between just being a good person and you know, then on the other side being a martyr and kind of suffering and almost enjoying the suffering because you're doing something for somebody else, and you're sort of like, but you know, this person needs so much of me, and it's like hurting me in some way, but I'm still doing it because on some level I'm getting a kick out of it, and that is something that, you know, like I don't think should be celebrated so much.
Yeah, I mean, that's what people call emotional labor, right? Like picking up all, like making sure everyone else is happy. And obviously, if you believe in empaths having powers of being able to sense other people's emotions and feel them and everything, you could understand why people like that would feel that even more intensely, because it's not like just, oh, someone in my immediate vicinity is angry. When they're angry, I'm feeling angry, so I want to stop them feeling angry so I can stop feeling angry. So they just become highly attuned to taking care of everyone in their remit, and they forget to look after themselves. Again, I so related to this. I used to live with someone who would sulk, just the loudest sulking you've ever heard. He would just go quiet for like sometimes a whole like day. He'd just be quiet. He'd just be avoiding eye contact, you know, monosyllabic answers. If you ask him what's wrong, he just says nothing and sort of walks out the room. And I couldn't relax until he'd come out of that mood, because I was so like, I don't know, it made me really anxious, thinking, oh my, like, what's going to happen? Is there something, like, what's wrong? I couldn't couldn't work out. And I don't like people being, especially when it's mysterious, when they won't tell you what's wrong. It's really difficult for me.
I totally agree. And that, no, I've experienced that. I was experiencing that recently, and I was like, oh, surely I should just be able to, like, you know, put up my, you know, wall, as it were, and just be okay with them not being okay. But there's a deep part of me which is like, no, but I need to make it better.
Yeah.
Or, you know, they need to, and it's that idea that, you know, how would it solve the problem? Oh, right, they just need to tell me what they want, and then I'll do it. That's not a good way to be, in my opinion.
No, I think it's definitely better to somehow, like you say, be okay with them not being okay, and realize it's not your problem, really. But it's hard.
That is definitely Right. And, I think we need a degree of a sensitivity to that, but without being carried away. It's almost like I'm aware that it's cold outside. I'm not going to go out naked, but I'm not going to just never go outside when it's cold.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but it's something like that. Yeah.
This was really strongly what she was suggesting to us. She was big on personal responsibility. I think every single video, there must have been about 10 videos that we watched. You reckon about 10? I don't know. And they're all 15 minutes long or so.
Yeah, and definitely that was one of the things that came up, and I have it highlighted. Taking responsibility, and then in brackets, agreed. That was my note.
I don't know. So I'm kind of with her. I do think she's saying take 100% responsibility for how you feel. When you take responsibility for your own feelings, you stop burdening other people with your needs, and you free yourself from dealing with their needs. This is her whole thing. It's like a twofer. And it does make sense. But then it kind of makes me feel like, this is a little bit off topic, but I watched this Louis Theroux documentary about polyamory, and there was this sad man called Jerry. I don't know if he was sad. I'm not an empath, but he struck me as sad. He was like, he was in this couple, and they were just a standard monogamous couple. And then his wife gave birth, and then she had postpartum depression. And then she decided that the only thing to get her out of this slump was to take on another partner. And so she'd had him, Jerry, her husband, and then this other guy for quite some time, and sort of dividing her time between them. And they were on the documentary as an example of like a happy poly couple. And yet Jerry didn't have another partner, and he was ending up spending a lot of time alone while she was out with her partner. And so Louis Theroux asks in that way that he does, do you think it would be nice maybe if you seem like a little bit unhappy, would it be nice if maybe she stayed home with you a bit more? And, I don't know, like something along those lines. And he just said, no, it's fine. Jerry is responsible for Jerry's happiness. And I was just like, oh, poor Jerry. Like, I think to some degree we are responsible for the people we care about happiness. And I think this extreme, you're not responsible for anyone else thing, I can see how it could happen, because if you've taken on too much responsibility for other people because of whatever, your personality, your childhood trauma, whatever the theory is, because you're an empath, you might just swing too far the other way and be this actually quite isolated person.
Well, I don't know. I kind of feel like Jerry has a point. I do really genuinely believe that we all have a responsibility for our own happiness. The only thing that I would say is it's owning up to when you're not happy and then doing something about it. So if Jerry was honest with himself and was like, actually, this situation isn't good, and I'm going to get out of it or get my own bit on the side, then that would have been the solution. But I think this idea of sugarcoating our feelings because, well, I should be happy, I should be okay with this, that's bullshit. Like, that's what people shouldn't be doing. And I think that's different from taking responsibility.
Yeah. I'm not buying the 100% again, maybe this is, I don't know. So when I was a kid, I would get very upset about all sorts of things, and I especially about fights with my step siblings. And I can remember talking to my dad about it, and he'd give me similar advice. He'd say, you decide how you feel. You don't have to feel upset about this. You don't have to feel anxious about this. You don't have to feel worried that your stepsister hates you or whatever I was upset about. And I kind of felt like, that's nice. And maybe I was a kid and I didn't have any emotional management, but how, we exist in relationship and in context with other people. You can't not be affected by the people around you. And I feel like to some degree it's just like a shrugging off of someone's pain, going, oh, well, you take responsibility for that. It's like, no, if you love me, you take a little bit of responsibility. And not 100%, well, maybe 2%.
I still don't agree. I don't think I could ask of anyone to be anything other than they are. All I can do is change my situation. I can't necessarily change my emotions though. So I do think telling somebody just don't be sad, that you can't do that. But just to accept it, I think feels like, it's the serenity prayer, which is my favorite thing. Either fucking deal with it or stop complaining. I think that's what it says. No, it's not. It's give me the courage or whatever to accept the things I can change and the wisdom to know the difference, or words to that effect. And yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. It's a complicated topic. She brought in Teal Swan to clarify some things. Mm-hmm. Teal Swan is a kind of famous spiritual internet personality. I don't know how else to explain her. And she said, basically, it's not your responsibility to try and protect other people. And I was like,
yeah,
I don't agree with that. And she also said that a lot of us who are empaths need to be divas. Like, we need to satisfy our own needs, and we have complex, amazing, important needs, and we need to focus on satisfying them before we deal with other people's shit. And I was just like, come on, Teal Swan. Do you have anyone in your life? Because...
Oh, yeah. I mean, I kind of I do think she has a point there. But it's like, you have to have... Again, like, how you can't, like, judge what the best way to be is. But... like, caring for others, for the most part, feels good to people, right? And it puts them in a better place. And it's hard for most humans to contemplate not caring for other people.
Yeah.
But there are some people who genuinely don't and don't have that capacity. But it's not like I can't help but think it's not really a choice for a lot of people.
Yeah. Like, if you're like sociopathic or something, then I believe that's just something you're born with, and you're not going to be able to muster some empathy for anyone, I suppose. Although I do think that there's been, obviously I'm not comparing sociopaths to autistic people, but there has been some, because autistic people often have low empathy as well, hence the EQ thing. But they've been doing some training with children, basically teaching them cognitive empathy. We'll get on to talking about what empathy is exactly. And they have had some success in helping kids develop more empathy. So I think it is possible. But anyway, this is a whole issue, and this is a lot of the course was devoted to this, on how to defend yourself. She specifically says she doesn't want us to think of ourselves as victims, and then she spends a lot of time describing how to deal with many of the problems of being an empath.
A victim.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this is something that I struggled with a lot, and I think it was one of my first notes was as soon as you start speaking in a way that, like, you know, categorizes people in that kind of victim way, that's just not good, you know. And like, there's a lot of talk about trauma, and at the same time, she does seem to be careful for not like dwelling in that place. It's kind of like, let's acknowledge the challenges, and then not be like literally not be victims to them.
Yeah, you might get a sense listening to us talk about this that it sounds a lot like kind of homemade therapy, which is what I thought. It was a lot of, in fact, she actually spent some time dwelling on a personal story of this friendship breakup that she'd had. Do you remember that bit?
Mm-hmm. That's very self-indulgent, but yeah, continue.
No, I thought it was really good. I found it really interesting. She's basically describing how she had this friend, and they had been friends since they were at university together. And back in the day, they got on great and they had loads in common. But then they kind of drifted apart because she'd got into all the spiritual stuff and her friend hadn't. And she sensed that her friend was sort of disapproving of the spiritual aspects of her life. And obviously, since this is career, that's a big part of her life. That like, and she specifically sensed that her friend was having conversations with her behind her back, and that if she could overhear those conversations, they would hurt her. And this general feeling that she was being disrespected and judged, and yeah, so she confronted her best friend, sorry. She confronted this friend, and they ended up having a friendship breakup over this issue. And I was really, at first I was like, okay, this seems a little bit self-indulgent, but I thought it was a really interesting portrait of what can so often happen when people go those two different directions, the spiritual direction and the rational direction, or the seeker direction and the skeptic direction.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, am I clairsentient? Am I seeing the future?
Will astrology break us up? No, I feel like, and I know I said self-indulgent, but I have a similar story, which I'm going to share with you all now. No, I won't. But it's that idea that it may not just be the spiritual thing. It could also be the self-development thing. Because I feel like as soon as I got into that world where I was learning a bit more about myself and like what I needed, and I did have to cut out a friendship because I became aware that I was being taken advantage of because I was paying more attention to my needs. And I encourage people to do that. So I'm kind of with her on this. And yeah, I think it's a result of like, if you change interest, but like that could be anything. It could be like, oh, my friend just got really into like swimming and like all they want to do is swim. And I'm really anti swimming. So I don't know. I feel like it could be anything that breaks people up. It's when people grow apart, when they change.
Yeah, I think it's definitely partly that. But I don't know. I've had friendship breakups, which is a really difficult thing actually, and people don't talk about it enough, do they? Like I never hear people telling anecdotes about friendship breakups, but they can be so painful and difficult to deal with. I've been on the other side of that. I had a friend who was very spiritual, and I found that I kept on biting my tongue around her because I didn't want to be the skeptic who was constantly like criticizing her ideas and stuff. And it got to the point probably where she was feeling just like Amanda, that I had bad thoughts behind her back. And, you know, I was sort of internally rolling my eyes. And I on the other side of this dynamic, I was like, I don't feel like I'm being authentic around this person because I'm never being my true skeptical self. And it all just sort of disintegrated from there. And that's one of the reasons that like I sort of made a pledge to myself that I wasn't going to do that anymore. And when we met, this was before me and Kat met. So when I met Kat, I was like, no, I need to always get the skeptic out when it comes into my head, because otherwise what's the point? You're not really friends with someone if you're pretending to be someone else. So I may as well give it a go.
Yes. And I mean, obviously got a lot from that, you know, and having those, I think, maybe this isn't for everyone, but like I value honesty, right? And so I think that's how our conversations began. And like, for example, we spoke about chakras earlier. I remember talking about chakras like one of the first few times I met you, and I was like, this is great. We can have honest conversations in a town or a city where often people are kind of pussyfooting around these issues.
Yeah.
And I think that was very refreshing. So again, it's some people will come with you on your spiritual journey, some of them won't, but it shouldn't really matter. What should be important is that, you know, like we're trying to do is respecting other people's opinions.
Yeah. I really like she referred to her friend as being matrix smart, which I loved.
Oh,
that would make me so happy if someone referred to me as matrix smart.
I'll try to remember that for the future. But yeah, I think she also made a Star Trek reference.
Oh, did she?
Did you get that?
I can't believe I missed it.
Yeah, she totally did. Aw.
Was it when she was talking about shields?
I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to watch it all again.
Oh, no. You monster. I did think, because one of the things she said that she wasn't going to teach us, but is very big in the empath world, is how to create a shield so you can keep other people's emotions out. But she said she didn't want to teach us that because it would encourage us to think of ourselves as victims who need to be shielded. And I wondered where that idea of... I tried to Google it, I couldn't find anything. But I wonder whether that idea either came about from Star Trek or from sci-fi, or whether it came before that, because that idea of throwing up a sort of shield, and it's always shown as like a light, you know, like a sort of bubble of light around the body. I wonder where that came from originally.
Yeah. I wonder if it was to do with all the different... Have you heard about like the different bodies? We might have talked about it in the yoga episode.
Oh, yes.
You know, you've kind of got your like flesh body, your gross body, your astral body, all of those, your subtle body. Maybe it's something to do with that, because those bodies are real, as we know. And yeah.
So that was kind of the course, wasn't it? There wasn't, if this is sounding like a bit all over the place, it's because it completely was all over the place. There wasn't any kind of structure. There wasn't a syllabus. There wasn't like a learn 1, 2, 3 and then you'll be an empath. It was, in fact, I chose this course because it was called Empowering Empathic Abilities, but I think it should have been called Empowering Empaths, because it didn't boost our powers that I could measure. I went back and did the tests to see if I was boosted at the end, and my scores were very, very similar. Actually, I was 1 point higher on the empath score, and I was the same on the EQ score. So maybe that 1 point was thanks to Amanda.
Right, there you go. I didn't retake the test because I decided that my empathy skills had definitely dropped as my rage increased throughout the course.
Do you think it's even possible? I'm not sure that if we asked an empath, they would say it was possible to develop your powers, because she seemed to be saying this is the way you are. You can learn to manage it, and you can learn to deal with the difficulties that come with it. But there didn't seem to be anything about boosting it.
No, and I don't think there's I can't judge, but like it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that is even important to really try to boost. I think like increased self-awareness, and maybe we'll talk a bit more about this, that's not a bad thing to sort of try to focus on. But I mean, I don't think we almost have very much choice in how much we can pick up from other people. And also, it just seems less important than actually managing how we actually are, rather than just spending time and energy, as it were, on trying to change that.
Well, betazoids can project their thoughts and emotions to manipulate people. So I was hoping for some tips on that. Yeah, that would be really handy. So I did some research into empathy in general. What is it? What's the big thing? It's interesting because it seems like, I don't know when it first started. I remember when Barack Obama was president, he was talking a lot about empathy, and that was like a big deal, and it seems to have not really gone away since then. Like everyone's talking about we need more empathy, it'll solve all the problems in the world if everyone was just a bit more empathetic. But no one's really defining it very clearly. And I searched around and I looked at some of the psychological literature to try and get to the bottom of this, and I still wasn't finding anything, which suggests to me that this is just a really murky field. Maybe it's just very early days, or lots of people doing lots of small studies, not really defining their terms properly. But for the overview I got, and this is kind of drawn from a paper called The Neuroscience of Empathy, which is published in Nature Neuroscience. I'll put it in the show notes. There are 3 stages. So there's experience sharing, which is feeling someone else's emotions as if they were your own. So that's what we'd call empathy. Stage 2 is mentalizing. So that's consciously considering whatever those emotions were and trying to figure out their sources and work through understanding them. I guess we could call that sympathy, maybe. And then the 3rd stage is pro-social concern, so being motivated to act, so reaching out to someone in pain, that sort of thing. So maybe you call that compassion. So the initial thing is empathy, then it moves on into a more intellectual thing, and that's sympathy, and then the 3rd stage is actually doing something about it, which is compassion. I mean, again, you'll find these terms used interchangeably and confusingly, but just for the sake of argument, let's go with that. And people tend to think, or at least this paper presented it as if, empathy is like the initial spark that gets the ball rolling to have those other 2 stages. So when we evolved, we needed that initial ping of empathy to make us think about other people and then actually do something to help them. And that's kind of obviously very useful for a social species. The idea is that the actual empathy, the feeling other people's feelings, is caused by something called mirror neurons, which are these cool, funky little neurons in our brains, which when we see someone experiencing pain, the same neurons in our brain light up as if we're feeling pain, but obviously not as intensely, unless people are synesthetes. There's a mirror touch synesthesia where it literally feels as intense as, or much closer to the intensity. They can't watch horror movies, these people, because obviously it's just beyond unbearable for them. They discovered these mirror neurons in a really interesting way. They had a little monkey all rigged up with all electrodes on his heads or whatever. And they were doing experiments with him. And then after they were finished, the experimenter reached out to pick up some fruit on the other side of the glass. And they still had the electrodes on his head. And they saw the part of his brain for picking up fruit light up. They're like, that's weird. He was just watching someone pick up fruit, but his brain's firing as if he's picking up. And they're like, ah. So this is actually quite recent. I can't remember exactly where I think it's in the 90s though. So the whole mirror neurons thing is super new, really interesting. There's lots of research going on to it. But the important thing to know when we're talking about empaths is this is not actually feeling someone else's feelings. It's your brain guesses at what they might be feeling, which is why we get it from horror movies. Because obviously people in horror movies aren't being tortured, really, they're actors, but we still feel the feelings because we're looking at their faces, we're looking at the situation, we're reading all that stuff and we're putting it together, and then we're feeling what we imagine the character is feeling, not actually what the actor is feeling. So that's kind of empathy.
So it is kind of like, I mean, it's weird because it almost sounds like if it was, it's like imagination in that way. It's like getting some kind of stimulation. Actually, it's not quite that, because you're actually getting stimulation from the outside. I think some empaths will look at a photo and be able to, they say, they'll read the energy of that person. But it's like, it's also just this cool thing that the human mind can do, where it will see something and create a story around it.
Yeah, exactly.
And like,
it's one of the most important things we can do too.
Yeah, and I can see how some people are probably better at it than others, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's like
it's selected for, I mean, you can see why it'd be selected for, because we care for our children, and because they carry our genes, and the children that are more cared for do better, and they carry the genes to care for others. And there's also like, you care for other people who might carry your genes, your sisters, your brothers, whatever. And then the people who care about the other people in their group, not just their brothers and sisters, but people who don't carry their genetic material, are doing this thing called reciprocal altruism. So if someone falls down an old well, those old Neolithic wells they had in the day, and you help them up because you feel empathy, then when you fall in the old Neolithic well, they'll help you up. So it's something that helps us thrive. It helps our genes thrive. And they see it in all different mammal species. Interestingly, not so much in non-mammals.
I was going to ask about that. I've got a cat next to me. Do cats have empathy then?
Well, they probably
would have to have
sort of proto-empathy because they care for their young.
Yeah.
So some animals just don't care about their young at all, like a salamander. It'll just like lay its eggs. I think salamanders lay eggs. Anyway, lots of like lizardy type things. Some birds as well. They're off. They don't give a damn after they've given birth. But most mammals do care about their young. And then the theory is that that's like how evolution usually works, is it needs something like that, like care, investment in young, and all those sort of feelings that go along with, I love my little baby and I want to make sure it's safe. And then that sort of develops and hooks onto other things until you start caring about other people's babies and other people you've never met and people you see on the news, and it just expands outwards from there. But it is just an evolved trait which helps us promulgate our genes. It doesn't evolve because it makes us good people. So like all evolved traits, it's got like loads and loads of flaws.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which is not something people talk about much. Well, except Paul Bloom, who's this writer who wrote a book called Against Empathy. It's a brilliant book. And he's just pointing out kind of the obvious, but I don't think it had really been said much before he wrote this book, which is empathy is all well and good, but it has these bugs. For example, we empathize more with charming, attractive people than we do with ugly, non-charismatic people. Yeah, not so nice. We don't empathize much with, this is something as a vegan, as an animal rights advocate, I feel passionately about. We empathize so much more with like cats and dogs than we do with octopi or fish or any snakes. That's irrational. These animals are just as intelligent and just as deserving of care, I think, as like the cute ones. So that's a weird thing. We'll do an episode on veganism one day. So we don't empathize much with non-human animals at all. And then when we do, we have them like on a hierarchy of cuteness or a hierarchy of how well we know them, I guess, because dogs and cats are in our lives and we care about them more. We empathize with them more because of that. We find it hard to empathize with big groups of people or people who are far away. There's been some interesting experiments around this where they show like one little kid and they're like, will you give £1 to help Susie get something to eat? And everyone's like, oh yes, please take my £1. But then if you just show Susie in the context of her whole village and say, will you give £1 so that this village can get something to eat? People are much less likely to donate. And it's just because, we don't we see individuals seem much more important to us. It's called the identifiable victim effect. It's like a cognitive bias where we care more about individual identifiable victims than we do with big groups. In fact, there was that famous saying, something like, one person's death is a tragedy and like a million is history or something. I don't know. I can't remember.
Yeah.
You'll know the quote. You at home will know the quote.
Something like that.
Something along those lines.
We've done some great misquotes in this episode.
We have. And then we don't empathise with people when we can't see the direct harm. So it's much easier to empathise with someone when you're literally seeing them wincing in front of you. But when you're in Primark or somewhere where they sell clothes sold in sweatshops, it's hard to like imagine those kids over there in a sweat. It's like it's too distant, it's too abstract. Yeah. And these are all issues that people who work in charity and different, human rights stuff think about how to sort of overcome those flaws in the way that we empathise. But the big one, which is like really worrying and really important for our world today, well, all of those ones are important for our world today, but the one that probably is the most politically relevant is we empathise more with people of our own skin colour than people of other skin colours.
Jesus.
It's called the
I was
racial
scared
empathy
that you were going
gap.
to say that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just anecdotal. You can definitely see how it would happen because empathy evolves so that we look after our own tribe, people who carry our genetics. So it makes perfect sense that we would care more about people with our skin colour because they're more likely to be one of our tribe.
I do empathise more with ginger people than anyone else on this planet, so there's that. In fact, I only empathise with ginger people. No, I'm kidding.
They've done tests where they measure skin conductance, which is a good sort of metric for getting how anxious people are and how much they are sort of invested in what they're looking at. So they measure skin conductance and they get the subjects to watch as they touch people with a needle or with an eraser. And they put a person of the same skin colour in front of them and they put a person of a different skin colour in front of them. And I think some of the experiments they've actually got they've managed to make the people purple. Obviously you'd have to see them on a screen. Maybe I don't know exactly how that works. But you can see how people they feel those feelings, their mirror neurons light up and they're anxious and they're worried and they're feeling the feelings of the people who look more like them, much more dramatically. And then it suddenly makes sense, like so much stuff plays out about how we think about people within our own society and our own culture. But also when we think about people starving in Africa, they're very different to us. That makes us care less. It's really tragic, but it's true. So empathy, it's not all it's cracked up to be, basically. I mean, Paul Bloom's point is that we should focus more on the sort of mentalizing and the compassion, so more on the sympathy and the compassion and less on the empathy, because empathy can just mislead us so dramatically.
Well, I can see that, and I can see how, like, basically, if you're just kind of going by this instinctual, irrational vibe, like we've been saying, kind of like feeling about someone or something, that like you said, it can be misleading, and good old science is, I guess, showing that. But if we can use our sort of like higher mind, our prefrontal cortex, to kind of really consider things and meditate on them a bit more, then maybe we can actually develop the useful capacity of empathy a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting you said that because it's very true. Those 3 stages of empathy that I ran through, they're happening in different parts of our brain. So they're like, I can't remember exactly. These words just flow past me because I don't know what they are. But yeah, they're located in different brain regions, and you can watch them. If you put someone in a MRI, you can watch them light up in turn as people experience empathy, sympathy, and compassion. So obviously, I don't think we should do away with empathy, but I think it's interesting that everyone touts it as this unmitigated good when actually it's not entirely good. And a lot of stuff, and Paul Bloom talks a lot about like the justice system, because if it's a jury trial, then empathy plays into that a lot, and people will give lesser sentences to people of their own race, for example. One of the important things about having a jury of your peers, because people will be more lenient to people who are closer to them. People are also much more lenient to women, which they think plays out in the judicial system with women getting shorter sentences. So yeah, it's lots of complicated, weird stuff that we're only just starting to understand about empathy.
Yeah. So that was your research on empathy?
Yeah, I think I'm not entirely sure how much when people talk about being empaths, I don't know how much they're just using that word because it's all you can really hang a hat on. Because as I said at the beginning, like with that empath test, I don't feel like that was testing my empathy. I feel, because we already have measures to do that, like the EQ test. So I think it's something a bit more complicated is going on with the people who call themselves empaths. I think it's like, I don't know, like it seems like there's a kind of a personality thing. It's maybe even a mental illness sort of thing to some degree.
Well, this is it, and this is kind of what I'm not. I haven't been able to get clear on, but I would love to, because when I talk about, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but the idea of introverts, I talk about empathy a lot, like as though it was a superpower, not necessarily reserved for introverts, but one that we have like particularly strong access to.
That's interesting, because Julia Orloff, who made our empath test and wrote the Empath Survival Guide, does say that most empaths are introverted.
And I don't, as much as I've heard this too, and anecdotally, it seems to be very common in the introverts I speak to is having, or like self-reportedly high empathy, and they seem to present in a way, if you're in conversation with an introvert, often, not always, I would describe who I'm talking to as seeming more empathic, more considerate, and maybe that's just because they're listening more, or like, talking about themselves less, or whatever. So like there are lots of things that I definitely don't have scientific research for this, but it's a story that I'm guilty of perpetuating as well.
The introverts are more empathic than your average extroverts.
Yeah. And I do need to really sort of dig into that one. But would you like to hear about the overlap with empathy and other personality types? So again, I try to sort of dig around with this because there were various personality traits that I'm interested in, where empathy kind of bubbles up, and there does seem to be an overlap. In a lot of like introvert blogs that I read and books, empathy will be mentioned a lot. There's a quote here from a post I read on introvertdear.com. It says, "There are a lot of ways I describe my personality. An introvert or a highly sensitive person," which I'll talk about in a bit. But I think being an empath is really at the core of who I am. So this kind of suggested to me that, again, it's another like badge to hang or to pin on our like, what am I proud of? Like, what is my personality made up of, and what am I identifying with? And in some ways that can be really helpful, right? Especially in terms of like self-confidence. You can be like, well, I may not be like the chattiest one in the room, but at least I am super empathic. Which I don't have a problem with that. I don't care if that's not scientific. I think that's helpful to have anything like that you can kind of use in your kind of toolbox, or at least think that you use. The commonality with introversion and empaths, I think, is when we're talking about this mythical energy thing. And I do use this word to define introversion. I say about how they manage their energy differently than extroverts, and we get our energy from spending time alone. And I'm using energy in this kind of like a catch-all way, but both circles, like all of these circles, do seem to talk about energy, and this idea that we're kind of more sensitive than the average bear, which is another kind of separate trait. Highly sensitive persons, or HSPs. The interesting thing about this one is that it does seem to have some kind of biological source. There's and Elaine Aron is really great in this way. I think she's definitely tried to make this scientific. She says it is innate. In fact, biologists have found it in over 100 species, and probably there are many more, from fruit flies, birds, and fish to dogs, cats, and horses. This trait reflects a certain type of survival strategy, being observant before acting. the brains of highly sensitive persons actually work a little differently from others. So, I mean, that seems to be helpful to know that, like, people can be more sensitive to their environment. Like babies,
I mean, it
who
makes
cry a
sense. Yeah, it makes sense that some people are much more sensitive than others. I mean, you see that just in the people. I mean, we see that when we look at those EQ scores as well, that some people are more sensitive in different ways. I come across the highly sensitive person thing before, and my thought was, I don't know. At first, I mean, I tend to be kind of cynical on these sort of things and think, oh, you're just like a special snowflake, aren't you? You know, like, oh, I'm so sensitive. I'm very different and special. But and then I looked for to see how these people were actually defining being highly sensitive people, and a lot of the stuff they have, like the criteria they have for assessing whether you might be a highly sensitive person, are very. I mean, they're very subjective, which is what you'd expect. But there's stuff like one of the ones on the list that really stood up to me was, I have a rich, complex inner life. I just thought, well, one, who would say no to that? And two, how do you know? Like, I don't know what's going on in your head. My inner life might be tragically, like, you know, it might be black and white compared to yours. I have no way of jumping in your head to find out. So I'm always like a bit wary of this stuff, which you have to suppose that you know what other people think and feel to assess it.
See, I would disagree with that. I actually think that that's irrelevant. I think it would be helpful. I think it would be more scientific if we could. But I also think it's irrelevant. I think if you identify as feeling what you think is a rich and complex inner life, I think that's enough to be helpful and good information.
But what, rich compared to what?
Doesn't matter. It's just like that chocolate cake. I mean, rich compared to like how I feel about staring at like a dry wall, you know, like I feel like we have a concept of this word that represents what a rich, complex inner world is, and if we identify with that, then like, let us have it.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But you're kind of going two different directions, because when you're saying this is an actual thing, there are people who are more highly sensitive, and there's this biological basis for it. And then on the other hand, you're saying, well, if you identify as being highly sensitive, then you are. And I feel like there's a bit of a disjunction there. It's a bit confusing, because it's either a real biological thing that we can test, or it's just how someone feels and how they imagine other people's lives are all dull and boring compared to their wonderful time they're having in their head, you know?
Or it's both, or both are true. Like, we can both observe babies that cry more than other babies at like a bright light and say that maybe there's some biology there. But we can also say that self-reportedly people feel a certain way, and without discounting either of those from being true.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting subject. Maybe we should do an episode on highly sensitive people, because it seems like a bigger thing than I had imagined. Amanda, our teacher, was very dismissive of it. She basically said that empaths can actually feel other people's emotions. They can sense energy because they're tapped into the energy web, whereas the HSPs are just imagining it.
I did not pick up on that.
Well, Jesus. I paraphrase. She didn't say that exactly, but that was basically her thing. The difference between because a lot of people say this, Julia Orloff says this, not all empaths are highly sensitive people, but not all highly sensitive people are empaths. And the difference is that empaths are doing something that is magic, whereas highly sensitive people, they're just, they're just basic.
I don't think I can agree there, because I do tend to muddle a lot of these into the same group, and a lot of it for me is the importance of how it feels to that person. It's like the subjective feeling of an introvert feeling like my energy's been drained from spending time with a big group of people, also my feeling that this room is disturbing to me in some way, or the feeling that I can pick up that you might be pissed off or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, to me, it's like, it's all subjective, it's all real, and to say that one is like, I'm objectively literally picking up on your energy, like I can't I'm not convinced about that one.
Yeah, it's weird. It's
And I
almost
don't
like
think
they
it's
have to
important.
defend their empath territory.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing which because it's a bigger area, again, I have less to say than I should on this because it's something worth looking into separately, but codependency comes up a lot when that there are lots of sites about empathy, and codependency does come up, as well as narcissists and relationships with narcissists and empaths. And I guess the idea here is because empaths are the kind of people who have more compassion and more understanding, and narcissists kind of pick these people out and thrive on them, and they need somebody to worship them, and they end up treating the empath like shit, and the empath in a weird way kind of gets addicted to this process, and the narcissist is addicted to the process, and it's like this weird codependent relationship. And people are.
Can you just define the word codependent? Because I think it's something that I'm not entirely clear. I think I have a sense of what it means, but
yeah, I could be wrong, but I think it's like a mutually beneficial but also harmful relationship. It's like you could be codependent. You could be dependent on alcohol, but I guess the codependency comes from the two parties mutually kind of feeding off each other in some way.
Yeah, the context I've heard it in is with AA, with Alcoholics Anonymous, where it's like the
Yeah.
codependent person, like you've got the alcoholic, but then their partner maybe, or someone who's close to them is
Right.
the codependent person. And they're like trying to help them, but they end up like encouraging, enabling, excusing their addiction, and it becomes this really toxic mess. I think that's where, like, I don't know if that's where the word codependent came from, but I think that's kind of where it became famous. I think it's like,
Yes.
is it something, I mean, it's kind of what we were talking about when we were talking about the Alice Miller stuff. It's like that relying too much on other people and taking care of other people and other people's needs, and, just for approval, and like to even like get a sense of your own identity, you need to constantly be supporting and encouraging someone else, and then you end up just being this hollow shell of a person who's not making the world a better place and not even really helping the person that you're codependent on. But it seems like it's sort of waned in popularity. Maybe this is why people are talking about empaths now instead.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I kind of found this kind of strange spectrum of empathy and narcissism as being something worth looking into. I'd like to get your opinion on this, but this idea that, and maybe we'll talk about it a bit later, but, a lot of this empath talk, especially when you're taking a course like this, is about like being very self-aware and like, which is great, but also kind of taking it to the extreme and kind of being self-obsessed. And then it's like, well, can empathy become narcissism?
Yeah, like the other end. Like I was saying, if you go too far with the whole, I take 100% responsibility and I don't care about anyone apart from me and I'm just going to focus on my needs. Yeah, I mean, that could, I think narcissist is like a clinical diagnosis type term, but you could certainly end up being an asshole. I don't know if you could end up being a narcissist.
Yeah, and well, I mean, the other thing about narcissists, it's not just like self-obsession. It really is like, it's seated in self-disdain. It's lack of self-love, and that's what kind of creates this strange like response. It's really interesting, and again, I don't feel like qualified to talk about it at this point, but it's a really interesting topic.
I feel like no one's qualified to, I mean, obviously some people are, but people just throw around the word narcissist willy-nilly, and I've never really like got exactly what they're saying, and it just seems like a mean thing that people call people they don't like, particularly their parents. Often hear, especially like rooting around in this world and reading more about empaths, it seems like every empath has a problem with a narcissist. It's often one or both of their parents, and they will happily tell you about it for a long time if you ask them.
Yes. And it does seem to be like there is this pattern in the world where you see somebody who has an experience, usually with a parent who kind of treats them, takes advantage of them in some way. That person then becomes like the martyr character, and then their offspring might be the opposite. They might be the narcissist. And, it kind of is this pattern that kind of emerges. It is what it is. It's not great.
The other personality thing that I thought kind of relevant to this is ADHD, because there's this one of the videos in our course, she just sort of turned upon us and gave us a good telling off and said, look, whatever you think, you're not starseeds. This is nonsense. No one is a starseed. Stop saying you're not starseeds. You're not like a special, amazing starseed. You're just a human being. You need to live with reality, which I thought was rich coming from her. So I was like, what the hell is a starseed? So I started looking into it. And it turns out there's just another word for like indigo child. Have you heard that phrase?
I have. I am one.
Are you? You're a starseed.
I think you are too.
Oh no. So it's the idea was I think she was a psychologist and a medium, I can't remember her name, but this woman just noticed that more than average, in her estimation, children were being born with indigo auras. This was like in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a shocking rush. I don't know what she was doing, but she was like hanging around hospitals, like, oh, look at that, another indigo one, how strange. So she decided that these people must be basically like the next evolution of humanity and probably extraterrestrial. And it sort of caught on, and there was this whole rash of people describing their children as indigo children. And these kids were basically like really precocious, very smart, all over the place, like found it really hard to pay attention, had shitty impulse control, and super hyperactive, just running around. And I was like, you're describing ADHD. I'm pretty sure that's what... I mean, I know that this is one of those things that gets overdiagnosed, but like the diagnostic criteria for being an indigo child or a starseed and being ADHD seem to be pretty much the same thing. And it kind of... all these different personality structures that we've talked about and the different ways you can interpret them through different lenses. I thought this was a really good example of something like ADHD is considered a bad thing that we have to medicate. And being an indigo child is a wonderful thing, and we should encourage them, and they're going to teach us stuff, and because they're so great. And I was just like, it's obviously people like trying to grapple with the facts of their personality and their kids' personality and just the people in their lives. And you can frame things any way you want, pretty much. I mean,
right.
There's no... It's just... I don't know, I just thought it was really interesting to see, because I think what we're looking at when we look at empaths and the whole empath phenomena is just this cluster of people who were cognitively unusual in similar ways, and then they've all had different ideas about how to interpret that. The only thing that they all have in common, I guess, is that they reject the traditional psychological interpretations of what they are and go for something a bit weirder.
Again, it's like another badge to hang on our like identity sash.
Yes. But I don't know, yeah. I can't really say that I'm convinced or not convinced, because I don't think that it's just a different way to think about these things. But it does worry me that potentially there are people who would benefit from, like CBT, some kind of therapy, or maybe even medication, who are not getting it because they're... Anyway, that's another story. The other thing that I thought was what we've been talking about is like people who think that they're empaths, but the other side of the whole empath thing is that there are people selling their services as empaths.
Right.
So we watched this documentary. It's a Vice documentary. It's really good. We'll put it in the show notes, because you should all, if you want an idea of what an empath is and what they think they are, this is a really good place to start. It's called Are You an Empath? And I just saw these people doing the same things that psychics do all the time. And this guy, David Savage, he's an empath, quite a fancy pants one, because he charges $300. It's £236 an hour. I checked his website at the moment.
Jesus.
Yeah, and he brings this up, though, which I thought was quite brave. He says the word psychic is on its way out, so there are probably people using the term empath because it sounds kind of cool now. Like when you say psychic, it's like, oh, that means you're crazy or you're phony or you charge £10.
Yes.
$10 at a window, yeah. when you say empath,
I
people mostly don't know what that means, and if they look into it, it means something that's legitimate.
This is different, but like, just that's a really good point. It's like our perception of certain words, that really does affect how we feel about them. And like, if you can kind of rebrand something, it's really interesting.
I feel like this is something that should be on skeptics' radar, that Psychic is currently undergoing a rebrand, and we're going to start seeing more and more more empaths
make sure you
crop up.
ring the alarm bells.
Well, I'll give you some examples, right? So in the documentary, in the Vice documentary, the woman, the narrator, goes to see a Reiki practitioner who's also an empath, and one of the first things she says to her is, "Oh, I think you might be an empath too," which is a classic thing that psychics do, because it makes people feel good. So it's flattery, which is a classic psychic thing to do, because then they like you and they like the whole process and they feel much more positive about it. And it's likely to resonate with them because they're obviously interested in spiritual stuff. Otherwise they wouldn't be here, getting a spiritual service, whatever it is. So that was like, classic psychic thing. And she just says, nice. She seems lovely, this Reiki empath lady. She just says comforting things like, you're worried that you might fuck this whole documentary up, but don't worry, you won't. You've got this. It's like, that's a very nice thing to say, but it's also super vague, exactly what a psychic would say. And then there's another couple of things I noticed. So this guy, Ryan Cropper, is he the guy I said earlier who was talking about psychedelics and empaths? Anyway, he said he was doing an online consultation with the narrator of the documentary. And he said he felt a dense energy in the room, maybe because of what someone's eaten. And she responds just immediately. She's got, "Oh my God, the producer, he just ate an egg naan and he's feeling all bloated." And this is taken as a really impressive hit. And then she recaps to us, the audience, and she says, "Wow, Ryan's such a good empath. He knew our producer had eaten an egg naan roll." It's like, no. He didn't know that. He said something very vague in general, but it was interpreted as specific and personal. And then it gets remembered and recapped to us as, wow, he had this amazing hit, which is exactly the same process that happens and that psychics rely on to make their things work. And then David Sauvage himself, the guy who charges $300 an hour, every time I saw him do a reading in this documentary, he talked about layers of people. So he's like, on the surface, you seem very happy, but underneath, I sense a bit of like a kind of calm, like a wave. And then underneath that, I sense fear. And then under that, joy. And then under that, fear. And he was just like, it almost felt like he was just waiting. I mean, he did it much more theatrically and cleverly than I just did. But he was like, he was just listing all these different emotions and making eye contact with the person and waiting until he saw them like do a little smile or nod, and that would be where he'd finished. It was just a classic psychic thing of that thing like, I'm feeling there's a J name. Is it J Harold Tom until they get to eventual name? I don't know.
Yeah. I can see how that happens.
There's a guy once I met, it is like, I don't know, an old wise man who I was smoking marijuana with, as you do. And I met him for the first time, and he looked at me dead in the eye, very serious, and says, "I see a deep sadness in those eyes." And I was like, oh my God, you get me, stranger. And I think, like, there are some things that you can say to any, 20-something girl you're smoking weed with that will be bang on hits. So like this thing, I just see them using a lot of the same tricks that psychics use. Not necessarily tricks as in they are deliberately tricking people, but these are just things that people do that make it seem like they know what you're thinking and feeling when actually they don't. And they could be doing that by accident. They could be doing it just a process of trial and error. They could be completely convinced that they're for real. And I think a lot of these people are convinced that they're for real. But it's the same old stuff dressed up in slightly more sciencey sounding language, but actually with very little science to back it up.
Well, my question is about how people think that this is working personally. So the empaths themselves, I think the vast majority, and maybe this is naive of me, I think they believe they're doing it truly. I don't think they're trying to fleece anyone. I really don't. And it was interesting. I heard it was an astrologer that I'm training with said, and she clearly sort of struggled with this idea, but she was like, sometimes I feel like I'm like inadvertently doing cold readings on people. And I don't really think she meant it, because I think cold reading, the term, is like a deliberate thing. You're deliberately trying to pick up on cues from somebody to like make a prediction, as it were. But she felt like she was kind of like unconsciously doing it, right? Because we do just pick up on things about people. And she was kind of like, I think, ethically struggling with that problem, because she wanted her work to be real and true, and that if it was cold reading or some kind of like other force working, that it kind of didn't count. So I think like that's probably a problem for like the legit, I mean, the people who have the best intentions and who really believe in the work they're doing. It's trying to explain how it's working and how they're doing it. And I mean, my general opinion is probably predictably going to be, it doesn't actually matter if they're helping people.
Yeah. I think we maybe mentioned this in the mediumship episode, but a kind of a general skeptic rule of thumb is the more money they're making, the less likely they are to be shut eyes. Shut eyes is what we're referring to when we say that someone thinks that they're for real, but is actually doing a cold reading or actually using, different techniques. But they've convinced themselves, shut eyes, because they're unaware of their own tricks that they're using. I think it's a term that comes from magic. But generally, skeptics say the more money they're making, the less likely they are to be shut eyes. And maybe that's because people like this lady that you met will deliberately stop using the cold reading techniques so that what she's doing is more real in her eyes, more legitimate, and then she'll be less good because cold reading is actually very effective, and then she'll make less money. So there's like a natural selection pressure where the people who are doing the cold reading are obviously going to be better because cold reading is very effective, and then they rise to the top and they make the more money. I know, but I got that sense from the people that were shown on the documentary, the Vice documentary. The ones who were charging them more money definitely seemed more skeezy to me. And then there was this lovely lady who just lived out in the middle of the countryside and like got in touch with the sheep's emotions. And I was like, obviously she's not trying to trick anyone. She's just living her life. I mean, she was a poet.
She was very
well.
cool.
I have a weakness for poets, but yeah. There was loads of stuff mentioned along the way on this course. I mean, we got so many show ideas, didn't we? Just
we did.
Stuff she was throwing at us.
Yes. Crystals.
Crystals,
was a big one
yeah.
for me.
They soothe and comfort the emotional body.
Yes, they do. It was interesting. She mentioned Bruce Lipton, who I think he deserves a podcast of his own. As in, we should cover it. I'm not suggesting he starts a podcast, but he gets mentioned quite a lot from different circles that I'm interested in, and
so he's a crystal guy.
I'm interested in his work. He's a developmental biologist. Okay, so here's a quote. Lipton says that our cell membranes are liquid crystal semiconductors made of silica. And that's what quartz is made out of, silicon dioxide. These crystal semiconductors have these gates and channels that open and close. They selectively let some stuff in and selectively keep some stuff out. And so Lipton says that our DNA scans our environment for relevant frequencies and then reshapes itself accordingly. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that...
Whoa, I don't even know how to pass that. Yeah. I mean, it seems a bit like what I was saying before, where there's this weird... I think this was brought up on the course, actually, where she was saying, crystals are amazing and they're really good because they raise our vibrations and they're super high energy, which is why they're used in radios and computers, because they transmit energy so well. And I was like, okay, we're back to using energy as in a measurement of joules, because that's what they're doing in computers. And then also in the metaphorical sense of like vavavoom, maybe vavavoom is a good option. Instead of energy.
It's probably been like trademarks or something. But yeah, I feel like when you try to force it into the science language, it's really appealing to me, that idea, and I do want to look into it more just before I really make up my mind about it, if I ever will. But it's that idea that, well, we're basically radios, right? So radios, like, we're the same, aren't we? And then you start using all of these, right? I mean, this is something that gets said, and some people who I really love and admire make those, and it's not an analogy. It's kind of like saying, well, it is an analogy, but and then you start extrapolating and say that you can make all of these other rules apply to us, which and make it sound scientific, and it isn't necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's that thing of like, if it's not working as a literal analogy, if we're not literally like radios, then we are metaphorically like radios. And if we're not metaphorically like radios, then we're literally like radios. It's like this kind of, I guess we call it shifting the goalposts or something, like this weird constant like reshaping and redefinition and never being pinned down exactly on what you, because if I was doing a course on empaths, this is how I would start it. I would say, okay, empaths are this, and give the definition of empaths. And they work using energy. And energy, when I say it, means this. And just like break down all the terms, because then everyone knows what page they're on. And it's really useful if you want to learn something. I mean, that's how a lot of courses, I guess if you went to a college course on whatever, that's how it would start, defining the terms that you're going to be talking about. And I feel like the cynical part of me says they keep it deliberately vague so they can get away with this kind of wishy-washy, but I'm not sure it is deliberate. I think that they actually haven't really clearly defined in their heads. I mean, people like Amanda, I don't think she has clearly defined in her head what energy is, and that allows her to sort of slip and slide.
It's the same for me, and it's something that like you're definitely encouraging me to do myself, is like, if I'm going to be talking about these terms, how can I define them better? But
it's just helpful for your own thinking to get clear on what everything, like otherwise I get confused on my own when I'm trying to think through a topic. It happens so easily that like words change meaning, or they in a different context they mean something different, and it's just a really helpful habit to get into when you start researching anything or thinking about anything in any depth. Just nail down those definitions of terms. You can always come back and revise them if you want, but nail down what you think they mean at the beginning so you know where you're at.
I'm cracking up because there's a term that Amanda defines. It's the crystal black tourmaline or tourmaline. Everyone loves black tourmaline. Everybody probably has a piece of black tourmaline. Black tourmaline is great for transmuting energy. It's wonderful for that. Actually, you know what? That might not have been Amanda. I think that was from Hibiscus Moon, crystalacademy.com.
Why did you find yourself there?
Because I was looking up crystals. And anyway, but I really loved that like really ridiculous paragraph to explain why I use black tourmalines, because everyone loves it and everyone has a piece.
Natch.
What the hell? Jeez. Okay, what else? What other associated woo could you
well, aromatherapy came up.
Yes.
Which is, I feel like it's very similar to crystals in that, crystals look pretty, aromatherapy smells pretty, but that's not enough. So you have to make up some science to go along with it. And it's exactly the same criticism of the crystal thing and of many of these things. And I actually think, thinking about it from a more empathetic perspective, maybe the problem is that we've so denigrated the imaginative, romantic aspect of life that to get any traction, like to sell stuff, to like get traction in the marketplace, you have to dress it up as science. And that just sucks for everyone, because skeptics are alienated, because I'm not interested. If you're going to start throwing around dodgy science, suddenly I'm turned off and I don't want to smell your smells. And the public gets misinformed about science. So that's no good. Whereas if we just had a culture which was more like, hooray for nice smells, why don't you go into this room and smell some nice smells? Or why don't you just like burn these oils and they'll smell nice? Isn't that interesting? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's art. It's nose art instead of eye art.
I just can't help but think it's just not enough for us, that we need some kind of sense of meaning behind something and like a purpose in like reasons for things. And yeah, sometimes we have to fabricate them.
I felt that a bit on the nature stuff as well, because she talks a lot about how going into the natural world can replenish you and replenish your energies. And one of the meditations that she proposed was where you you get in touch with the natural world and listen to like what the rocks are telling you or something. So that idea about spending time in nature being scientifically proven to like replenish you and replenish your energy levels and all these very vague things they say about it. It's a similar sort of thing. It's like, why isn't it just enough that being in nature is nice?
Well, again, I put this on my list of not woo things, the things that were I thought practical and helpful and like indisputable. But fair enough. Like maybe I can't help but think that, you know, some of these things can be helpful regardless of the reason why they're helpful.
Yeah.
Like that.
There's this thing. This is probably how you heard of it, because you've spent some time in Japan, haven't you? Forest bathing, Yoku.
Yeah.
That's something the Japanese have been doing for quite a long time. I think there was like some kind of big government push to get all Japanese people out into the forest, just spending time. They call it forest bathing, but it's just basically being mindful, sitting around looking at trees, smelling all the nice smells that come off all the pine needles and stuff, and just spending time out there in nature. Which, especially if I think that Japan is very densely populated in cities, so getting out into the countryside is probably a really good idea, just because it's nice out there. But I looked at the studies, and I don't know. I had mixed feelings, because I love being outside. I hike almost every day. It is something I genuinely get great pleasure from. But I just thought, how on earth, it's kind of like on our meditation episode actually, how would you differentiate between the effects of relaxation, looking at pretty things, exercise, being away from, your day-to-day life, your work, technology, being mindful. There's all these things going on. How would you separate out the benefits of being nature from all those other things? And also, you're just relying on self-reporting. So that makes all the data just super fuzzy.
But why on earth does it matter if the effect is the same? So why does it matter? Somebody says earthing. Okay, so here's a quote from, I think, Amanda. Earthing helps to dissipate excess positive ions and physically ground you. It physically grounds you electrically to the planet. Whether that's happening or whether you just like being in nature because it's a change of scene and something in your brain says this is good, sitting behind your computer screen is bad. Why does it matter, like, the reason behind those things? If the effect
it doesn't really matter unless you're claiming that it is scientifically proven that being in nature heals you, which is not true.
Right.
So,
Sure.
I mean, if you say being in nature is nice and I think it's something to do with ions, I'd be like, well, that's an interesting theory. I don't know. But if you say, there is scientific evidence that suggests that being in nature is healing, I would have to say, well, I don't think that's true. And like I said, when you look at the studies, they don't really differentiate between those things. And the self-reporting issue is always a thing. I mean, what would be interesting, and I couldn't find anything like this, they're all small sample sizes as well, at least all the ones I looked at. I mean, please hit me with interesting studies if you've got them out there. But you could so you could get someone and you could put them walking around an art gallery maybe. So you still have the looking at pretty things. It's still relaxation and leisure. Maybe they're not allowed to bring their phones. They can't be distracted. You'd have to have a good control group of people doing. You can't just have some people doing their normal day and some people get to have a nice walk in the woods and say, oh, the people who had a nice walk in the woods are having a much better time. Of course they are, The other thing I thought is, what if you work outside? Most of us don't work outside, but maybe if you're working outside all day, maybe if you're like you're out coppicing your trees all day, every day, you'd find it quite relaxing to go home, sit on the sofa. Whereas someone who works in an office would find it relaxing to go out into the woods. So I don't know. I'm just not convinced that it's the nature, again, super vague term, but that nature can cure or can heal. And that's what you get here thrown around.
And then we've got, I thought the other thing that was brought up a lot was law of attraction. She did kind of mention that at the start. Again, it was like the assumption that we were all on that page. She talks about the point of attraction, and she talks about going upstream versus downstream, and these are kind of all terms used a lot in that world. I think we could save it for another episode, but it was interesting for me to see like the assumption that if you're interested in empathy, you'll also be on the same page about law of attraction, Abraham Hicks, The Secret, that kind of thing.
You've always got to bring up that Abraham Hicks, any opportunity.
What? We will tackle them one day, but I feel like my opinions about it are already changing, unfortunately.
She actually mentioned, when she was talking about the law of attraction, she mentioned a study that I managed to track down. The way she pretty much recapped it quite well. She said that serial rapists, it wasn't serial rapists, but never mind, predators are shown a video of a mall. It wasn't a mall, but, close enough, and asked to pick out potential victims. And all these different bad guys pick out the same people. And then they did like an analysis to see what were the common features of these people they were picking out. And they found, looking at the study, she talks about energy, unsurprisingly, but the study, Betty Grayson and Morris Stein, is called Attracting Assault Victims' Nonverbal Cues. It's worth having a look at. And they decided that the main precipitator, which is the thing that sort of made the bad guys say, yeah, that's my mark, is it's about their gait. So it's about how they walk. If they're walking slowly or hesitantly or sort of in a sort of variable way, that is the predators aren't saying, I chose that person because of the walk, but they all choose the same people and all the people exhibit the same weird walking patterns. And the theory is that it translates to confidence, basically, your confidence level in the space. So I think about this when I travel. I'm really hesitant to get out a map, and I will just walk confidently in any direction, basically, because I feel like it keeps me safe to walk that way. And I mean, this study shows that that sort of intuition is correct, that there is something in that sort of idea of standing up straight, looking like you know where you're going. And it's more than whether you're, wearing a short skirt or whatever, because they looked at those sort of variables about dress and all sorts of things, and they found that much more important was the way you walk, which is...
Wow.
And Amanda had some good advice actually on this topic. She said it's really important to stand up straight, make eye contact, and talk in a slightly lower register. I don't know where she got that idea. That wasn't from the study. That must have been from somewhere else. So that thing of holding yourself more confidently and you'll be safer seems to have some scientific backing, maybe a little bit of scientific backing.
Yeah, I can imagine the voice thing, because I think a higher pitched voice is kind of what our voices do when we're scared. I think that would also make some sense. Yeah.
It kind of, and
Cool.
The law of attraction thing is, we'll do an episode on just the secret and the law of attraction. But there's this guy, Richard Wiseman. Have you heard of him?
I've heard of him.
You like him. He wrote a book called The Luck Factor, where he's talking about this long-term study he did. He got 400 people who describe themselves as lucky or unlucky. And then he basically looked at all sorts of personality metrics on them. And he found that there were some commonalities between people who describe themselves as lucky. And one of the things he found, which is bad for both of us, is that extroverts are luckier. And the theory is something like you meet more people, you make more connections, more opportunities. Risk takers are luckier, because lucky events often start with taking a risk, going outside your normal norm. And openness, like... if you're focused on one goal, you miss other opportunities. And generally having positive expectations makes you luckier because you keep looking. So this idea that your attitude affects your life, I think it's plausible. And that's kind of, when we talk about law of attraction, that's the sort of starting place I'm like, yeah, this makes some sense. Again, I'm not so sure about more of the paranormal claims that those people make, but interesting.
Well, that's it. It's kind of like, this is another thing where like the effect is something that we can buy into. The cause, or what they're saying the cause is not so much.
Yeah.
I think it's the case with a lot of these. So what else do we have? We talked about chakras already, I think. Is there anything else you want to add?
We've done chakras to death. No, just that my sacral chakra is feeling great right now.
I'm so happy. The washing machine is like running smoothly. How about Christ consciousness?
Oh, yeah. that I didn't
Like-
know what on earth she was on about when she said that.
Yeah, and when I've heard it used interchangeably with like Krishna consciousness, and you can have Buddha consciousness. And I don't know if you got this from your research because I think we both looked into this because it was a fairly new term to us. But it's basically like an enlightened being, like it's enlightenment, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, basically, I got a little definition from a website called Operation Meditation. What is Christ consciousness, they ask. Spiritual thoughts that enter into conscious minds are sometimes referred to as Christ consciousness. It's an awareness of the higher self as part of a higher universal system. It does not relate to the personality of Christ. Christ consciousness is a state of mind. It's an understanding that there is a universal and omnipresent force everywhere and connecting with his higher power. So
Cool.
it's basically, feeling all spiritual and shit.
It's good vibes. It's, if you have like, this is the thing. It's like that would be nice, right? I think we could most of us could agree that would be a good feeling place to be in. And some have maybe, even in the audience have like experienced this in a good meditation session or on an entheogen or something like that. But so remind me what that has to do with empathy.
I've absolutely no idea. I think this was just I think the relationship is something like a lot of the people who are doing this course and Amanda herself were brought up Christian, and it's, they're just taking baby steps away from their religion. That's what I really think. Like she said that she didn't like the way that Christianity was. She didn't like it was super oppressive and patriarchal and blah blah blah. Lots of criticisms of Christianity, which I agree with. So if you can redefine God as love and Christ as energy, you still get to keep both. You still get to keep your pretty pictures.
I found myself doing this. Like what can I take from the Catholic faith that that is still useful for me and also so like fits into my current worldview, and so I can totally see how Christ consciousness and also like interchanging that with other like of these kind of like prophet figures, as it were. Again, it seems useful if that feels good for people to kind of have this concept and like that's like the ideal state maybe for some people. You could almost say that it's objectively the ideal state, but
I think it's an interesting cultural thing as well, because obviously, I don't know exactly what the statistics are, but certainly the UK is a lot less Christian than the US.
Yeah.
And whenever I hear reference to Christ or God, I turn off or I bristle because it's not my experience. I've never been Christian. I wasn't brought up Christian. I don't know anything about that. Why on earth are you talking about your silly nonsense you made up in America, as far as I'm concerned? That's my summary of Christianity. But for them, like they're at a different point in their demographics. Now you're seeing more of a fall off, more and more people sort of identifying as nuns, as in not affiliated to any religion. And where do those people put all their spiritual impulses? And a lot of people like Amanda become not religious or not Christian because they don't like Christianity, not because they've like gone through and philosophically unpicked, the idea of a supernatural or spiritual world, but just because Christianity doesn't suit them anymore, and they're looking for something to fill that gap, which is kind of what you're saying, isn't it? And basically, I think there's more people like that in the US than there are here, because we've been more atheist for longer, and there's lots of people like me who are brought up atheist, or at least without religion, and maybe we don't have so much of that hole, although I do, we talked about in the ayahuasca episode, I do think that we all have an essential empty bowl inside our souls. But yeah.
So what about psychic vampires?
Oh my goodness. I had a friend who thought he was a psychic vampire when we were teenagers. He got really I don't know, he must have read about psychic vampires. We used to read all this stuff. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I shot him a text to ask him, do you still think you're a psychic vampire? and why? And he said no, he doesn't think he is a psychic vampire anymore. He says he was just weird and anxious as a kid, and it latched onto that, but I didn't get any more details. So if we speculate there's this thing called energy, and that it sort of moves between us and can move between people, it kind of makes sense in a weird way that some people can like suck it out of you. And I guess that's what a psychic vampire is supposed to be, someone who can like suck your energy. Is that how you interpreted it?
I mean, yes, I think, again, it's like a really useful way of describing it. It's kind of like a metaphor, but it's it does feel true that some people, after an interaction with them, you leave feeling drained. That is just a way of describing how you feel. Exactly. And like, I kind of had this on my list of like, well, technically it's not really woo, because I mean, this is just a real experience. Some people are arseholes, and you know, we probably would do ourselves a favor by not hanging out with those people, I guess.
Yeah.
And I came across terms like that in the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron.
Oh, I've read that a long time ago.
Yeah, so like that concept I think is like very emphasized in that book, and yeah, I talk about it a lot. I think it's a useful term just to be able to identify people who, it's almost like in a way you're kind of being judgmental without being like, well, there's being judging, because you can kind of say this person is just not good for me because they happen to like feed on me in some way, or like it's not good for me because like I don't want to feel drained. Actually calling somebody a vampire is maybe not so good. It depends on what side of the fence you are on in terms of vampires, but yeah.
Yeah, it struck me that if you're an introvert, then you're going to report many more psychic vampires than an extrovert might, because as introverts, we often feel like a bit tired after we engage with people because it's not our natural habitat.
There is, I would say that there's even science to back that up, because they do say that there's a dopamine response that introverts get less of from people than extroverts. So extroverts are getting this added reward from social interactions that introverts aren't getting as much.
So extroverts are psychic vampires, because what they're sucking from you is your dopamine.
Is that what I'm saying? Yeah. So the other one that I don't think is, that I think is objectively good and helpful, very much so, is the journaling, right? So again, we've kind of briefly touched on that, but one thing that I'd say is, you know, the idea of tracking your energy, I think is really great. The only thing would be, could this become a bit obsessive? Possibly depends on your personality type.
Yeah, I think I've never been really got onto journaling. In fact, the first time I tried it was when I read The Artist's Way, because she suggests you write 3 pages longhand every morning.
Yes.
They're called the morning pages, to get your creative juice flowing. And I just, I love to write. I've written books, comic books, but I can't, like, writing, I don't know, I've always found that very difficult to just write. Maybe it's because it's unprompted. Maybe I'd do better with one of those ones where they give you like ideas to start you off.
That's interesting. Maybe I'll try and make something like that just for you.
Aww.
No, really, like I do. I like coming up with journal prompts. I think that is helpful for many people.
I think it's also because it feels a bit unproductive, and I have that, I mean, I don't think it's a good thing, but I have that tendency to want everything I'm doing to be productive. And if I can't turn it into something that I can, you know, I don't know, do something with, if it's just going to sit there in my diary, I just don't feel motivated to do it.
Yeah, I just feel like as soon as I've written something out, especially if it's like, 3 a.m, I've woken up, can't get back to sleep, writing out those thoughts, even though that doesn't seem like it would work, it completely works. It does feel like you're emptying the bucket of the mind and you can go back to sleep. Yeah,
I think there has been some research into journaling, especially when it's like guided, like thinking about what you want your future to look like, sort of thing. And that it sounds a lot like certain types of therapy, and I'm pretty sure that there's been some research that finds it's effective for certain people. But yeah, maybe not for everyone, or maybe I just haven't found the right system yet.
Maybe you just need a better notebook.
Yes.
Take yourself
that's the problem.
To paper chase.
I have so many notebooks with like the first 2 pages covered in writing, and then I just, lose motivation and they go in the cupboard. And yeah.
So in general, harms, benefits, you know, I mean, I guess the course itself, it didn't seem particularly harmful to me. What about you?
No, I think like a lot of this stuff is just thinking deeper about what you feel and who you are, and that's always good. Self-knowledge is useful. I think maybe you could argue that putting it under a framework, this like a spiritual framework, could lead you to make bad choices, like distancing yourself from others, telling them that they have to take 100% responsibility for their feelings and you don't give a damn. That's probably not great. The other thing I was thinking about is like it's kind of pathologizing normal experience. Like a lot of the stuff that she describes just sounds like life, but this is like, no, this is because you're a special snowflake super empath. And maybe there's something that's not necessarily great about that, although it's always good to like get more insight into yourself. Maybe it'd be good to just say, you know, humans have these feelings sometimes, and it doesn't mean you're like a starseed.
Yeah, and I think just things like I actually find it more useful not to think about how unique I am in this way, but more like, oh, there are other people also like me. So there are other people who have been called too sensitive or whatever. I do think it's helpful to talk about these kind of traits or whatever you want to call them in that way, because I think it helps us both understand ourselves and understand others better.
Yeah, there's this. I was listening to someone talk about empaths, and they were talking about how you can identify yourself as an empath, because everyone has emotions, obviously, and they come and go. But if you're having these really dramatic mood swings where you don't know where they're coming from, like suddenly you're really angry or suddenly you're really sad, that's classic empath, because they're not coming from you, they're coming from the people in your environment. And I'm like, yeah, or you're bipolar. Could be. So it's like that thing of like, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not saying this is actually happening, but I think there's a risk that people with actual conditions that they could be helped through medication or therapy are instead considering themselves to be empaths and seeking out help from people like Amanda, who is, I think, has the best intentions in the world, but is not qualified to deal with people's problems. So it's kind of murky, but yeah. And this kind of leads on to this thing. It's generally a problem of mental illness denial, where people are missing out on help for real mental illness issues because they're being told, you know, I mean, actually in the course she did this. She talked about how there was this girl who thought she was growing wings, and it was like a kind of schizophrenic thing. But she was like, well, obviously there is something wrong with thinking you're growing wings when you're not in this dimension, but you're probably just interacting with another dimension, and you actually are growing wings in another realm. So you need to learn more discernment about which realm you're in.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like...
No. Well, I thought that sounds really helpful.
No, I think if you think you're growing wings, you need to go see a mental health professional. That's my advice to all you listeners.
But really, why?
Because these things about like having delusions can lead to really dangerous situations for people with schizophrenia. And the earlier you catch these things, the less likely you are to get yourself in serious trouble. So I'm not saying don't talk to Amanda about it, but also talk to a doctor, because we know that the brain and this is just a general problem in the spiritual world, right? Because we have this idea, they have this idea, and the spiritual people have this idea that the mind isn't a product of the brain, that it's like coming from somewhere else. In fact, I heard someone describe it. It's like it's funny you were talking about us being radios. It's like a signal transmitted from somewhere else. So they don't take into account the fact that the brain is a physical part of our body, and it can malfunction just like any other physical part of the body and cause mental illnesses. And, you know, there's a risk if you don't believe that the mind is a product of the brain, that you will not think about potential neuropathology, which can be very serious and can really hurt people, and, you know, it's just not good. So, yeah, I just see a lot...
hard.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree fully with that, just because I can't personally dismiss that. I guess in some ways I still think the radio thing could be a possibility, and like it's just one worldview right now, that's like the official one. The story that we're telling ourselves is that, the brain is this thing that's producing the mind, right?
Well, it's kind of a story, but it has evidence to back it up. Whereas the other conception of the mind being, something kind of disembodied doesn't have any evidence to back it up, apart from, it feels intuitively like it might be true. And I just think that's not a good. It's tricky because it's the brain and because it's the mind and it's super complicated. But I think when you're dealing with stuff that could potentially be mental illness, it's sensible to drop the spiritual lens, at least, for part of the time, and think about what could actually be going on. Because a lot of the things that people interpret, for example, and when we were talking about alien abduction in the Shadow People, not the Shadow People episode, the sleep paralysis episode, like people are having these experiences and they are genuinely having these experiences, but they could be indicative of something going wrong in their brain or going, it's one of the normal things that happens in our brains when our brain malfunctions or throws up some crazy shit. I just think it's really sensible to consider what might be going wrong biologically before you start leaping to the spiritual explanations, just because there are people who kill themselves or other people, or
sure,
this is what happens. Mental illness is horrible, and I've had experience with it. People I love have had experience with it, and there are treatments out there and there's therapy out there, and you might not, if you reach first for the spiritual, if you reach for the aromatherapy and the crystals before you reach for a therapist or for a doctor to actually work out what's wrong with the biology, I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, maybe. And maybe it's like we just need better care and systems set up for people. Because my first thought is, oh god, so you're just going to give this person a drug and call whatever symptoms they're having bad, whereas in another time or another culture their symptoms would not be seen as bad. It's just like, why are we calling it bad and then giving somebody a drug and not necessarily helping them, just kind of quelling those symptoms. I just feel like it's hard because there doesn't seem to be an ideal system right now.
Of course not. Yeah, that's why this spiritual thing exists, or not why it exists, but a lot of, it's filling a need. People don't feel like they're getting the care they need from their GP or from, whatever the system is, and then they look around to find someone else who's going to fulfill that. I don't blame individuals at all. I think there's a problem with our system where people aren't being looked after properly, and then obviously, naturally, all these things come up to fill the gap. Just like, when you let go of religion, something else fills the gap. When you don't have a properly functioning healthcare system, something else will come up to fill the gaps, and that something else is sometimes good but sometimes really not good, and it puts very vulnerable people in a difficult situation. That's my only point. It's a sort of vague point, and I'm not saying that I think Amanda is doing this, or I think that any of the people I've seen who call themselves empaths are doing this. It's just a general concern with mental illness denial, which is a thing, and it's really, really dangerous, because mental illness is just as, obviously your brain is a physical thing and it can go wrong just like any other body part. It can do too much where you produce too many, like cancer is a overproduction, right? So your brain, different parts of your brain can do too much and you can become, anxiety might be an example of that, or it can do too little and you lose function, or you can just have a whole part of, you can tell I don't know what I'm talking about right now, but the point is, stuff can go wrong in the old noggin, and it's worth getting the noggin checked out before you turn to some kind of spiritual intervention.
For sure.
That was like my PSA. So would you advise other people give this a go?
Yes, with caution. Okay, so I wouldn't watch that course again. Don't buy the course. It's not particularly great. However, I do think there are lots of good supplementary materials that you could read about. I do think Judith Orloff's work is interesting. And I think if you're interested in introversion, definitely read Susan Cain's book, Quiet. Check out The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron. There are definitely benefits in considering these ideas and seeing what parts of yourselves you can see in those and what that might mean for you, and how you kind of act in the world. But yeah, it's a slippery slope between getting kind of like obsessed with this stuff. I can speak from personal experience, and this idea of just always trying to protect yourself from arseholes, really, which we should do, but also like don't get hung up on it, and don't get too don't tell yourself the story that you're this delicate little snowflake that needs certain things. You're probably stronger than you think. So yeah.
Oh yeah, be the kestrel. Perfectly
be the kestrel.
balanced.
I like it a lot.
So that's it for this episode.
See you next time.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Let us know with a tweet or an email. We'd really love to hear about your experiences.
Yes, please tell us what we got wrong. You can email us at hello@seekerandskeptic.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @seekerskeptic.
You'll find the show notes for this and every episode at seekerandskeptic.com.
And if you're interested, you can find my skeptically themed comics at rebeccaonpaper.com or follow me on Twitter @RebeccaOnPaper.
And I'm at yoga_astrology on Twitter. And you can find me exploring the intersection of yoga and astrology at yogaandastrology.com.
If you liked what you heard and fancy supporting the show and spreading the word, we'd really appreciate a rating and review in the Apple Podcast Store or wherever you're listening.
Or just tell somebody you know about the show. Thanks for listening.